Good afternoon. Hello, my friends. Welcome to International Women's Day 2022. Can you believe it? We made it. We're back. Okay, you could do better than that. Really? That was it? Woo. Okay, it was 2 years ago, almost to the day, that we had our record-setting crowd for International Women's Day. We were celebrating our 5th annual International Women's Day here at the bar. We had like 350 people, several of you, I know, who was here 2 years ago? Yes, me too, right? We were so energized, we were so charged, we were so excited, and who knew 6 days later, all those doors were gonna close, bam. It's been an amazing 2 years. I'm Becky Rupert McMahon. I'm the Chief Executive here at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and I am doggone proud that we are back in person celebrating International Women's Day. Anybody know the international global theme for International Women's Day? Come on, I see a hand. I can't see who you are, but stand up. Say again, loud.
Break the bias.
You got it. That's exactly right. Break the bias. Break the bias. And so the way that the organizers explain the theme this year for Break the Bias, it goes like this. Imagine a gender-equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. A world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive. A world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together, we can forge women's equality. Collectively, we all can break the bias. It's so cool, break the bias. Hashtag break the bias. If you're on Twitter, get out there and start tweeting. We would love to see you, hashtag break the bias all day long. So we built our program today, the 7th annual summit. And for those that don't know, I've just started my 8th year here as the chief executive at the CMBA. And Melanie Farrell, Carrie Burns, and all of our teammates here who have become the partners in crime in pulling together from the staff side International Women's Day couldn't be more delighted to say, we hope that International Women's Day celebration in Cleveland stays right here at the bar from now through eternity. So we are thrilled to be back, year number 7. Our goal for today as we advance this theme, Break the Bias, is to celebrate women's achievements, to raise awareness on ongoing bias, and to inspire, perhaps the most important piece, to inspire each other to take action in our own way to advance the pursuit of true, sustainable equity. As you can see in our agenda, and by the way, if you haven't found it, the agenda is inside the front cover of the gorgeous program. Today's program is all about telling her story, which we are going to do by shining a mega spotlight on the power of women's voices in law, in film, and beyond. Of course, today would not be possible without a couple of partners, and I'm just going to touch on a few of them right now, and then we'll thank the others as we go through our afternoon here. First, I want to thank, great big shout out, if you're here, please stand up, our summit planning partners. It begins with the leadership of the CMBA's Women in Law section, the Greater Cleveland Film Commission, the Cleveland State University School of Film and Media Arts, and of course our partners at the Ohio Women's Bar Association. Thank you all of you for helping us get today started. The inspiration for our theme, although I have to give full credit to this year's president of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, Rose Feeney, Chief Legal and Ethics Officer for the Cleveland Metro Parks. Rose, stand up. She's going to be on a panel later, but Rose, thank you for helping us build our theme this year. So while this first session of our afternoon is getting started here in just a minute, we actually started at about 11:30 with a luncheon for some emerging women leaders who were joined by some of our most established and recognized senior women leaders throughout the community. It was a great, exciting day. The women, the emerging women who participated in that lunch earlier today, can you stand up real quickly? Thank you for being here. Everybody else in the room, keep looking at them. Connect with them this afternoon. They are looking to increase their networks. They are looking to expand opportunities. There is no better way for us to help break the bias than by lifting up this next generation of professionals. So thank you all who came to the lunch today, and particular thanks to our friends at Baker Hostetler who sponsored the luncheon today and made it possible. As part of the momentum building for this day, some of you were here on February 22nd. It was a Tuesday evening, and we went back to where I love to go, which is movie night at the CMBA. We were here in the auditorium. Carmina, I see you nodding. You were here. Several of us were here for the screening of the film 9 to 5, which was made possible by, of course, the producers, directors, et cetera, including one of our panelists for this first conversation, Ann Hill. And that evening was sponsored by the Ohio Employment Lawyers Association. It was an unbelievable viewing party. If you have not yet seen the film 9 to 5, run, don't walk, run to see the film. It was fantastic. It's been years since I've seen it. I have to say I forgot, which is silly, how prominently Cleveland played a role in all of that led to the 9 to 5 movement. So if you haven't seen it, let me just put a plug in. You gotta go see it. It's fantastic. I would also challenge you this afternoon as we go through our sessions, think about how you personally can answer the call to charge forward in pursuit of breaking the bias. When we get to the end of the day, we're going to do a quick wrap up. I would love to hear anyone who comes up with an I will statement. I will insert here. What makes sense to you? What are you pledging to do as we go forward from today to continue to help break the bias? You're going to hear an awful lot of inspiration in our panels, beginning with our very first. And at this point, I'm going to stop talking, except to introduce our moderator. Each one of our panels has been put together intentionally with some fantastic speakers who are experts on the given subject matter. And then we've also identified a fantastic facilitator who's going to keep the conversation going. But do you see the microphone up here? We hope you are going to jump in. We want questions, we want comments, we want feedback. You can also, if you feel more comfortable, you just want to stand up and shout from your chair, feel free. But if it gets too out of control, Cammie, that's your job. You're in charge. But please feel free to jump in and join this conversation. Cammie Brower is a long-term member of the CMBA and one of our most energetic and passionate leaders, particularly with our women in law space. She is the founder of the Cammie D. Brower Law Firm, where she is a specialist in labor and employment work. She represents exclusively employees, and I tell you, Cammie, if I had an issue, you're the one I'd go to. So without further ado, let me introduce Cammie to kick off the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. Welcome, everybody. As Becky said, my name is Cammie Brower, and I'm here today as the 8th District Board of Trustee representative for the Ohio Women's Bar Association, member of WIL, Women in the Law, and also board member of the Ohio Employment Lawyers Association. So many hats today. I first want to introduce the rest of our panel members, and actually have them introduce themselves. First, we have Anne Maria Hearn.
Hi, Cammie. Thank you. My name is Anne Maria Hearn. I'm a senior partner at the law firm of McCarthy, Levitt, Crystal, and Liffman. I've been practicing employment law predominantly on the plaintiff side, almost exclusively on the plaintiff side. I do keep some of our firm clients out of trouble. But I've represented plaintiffs in employment disputes for about 22 years now. I'm also a board certified specialist in labor and employment law. I am a champion of women and the proud mother of 2 teenage daughters.
All right, Amanda.
Hi, my name's Amanda Kwan. Hi, my name's Amanda Kwan, and I'm a partner at Ogletree Deakins, an international labor and employment law firm. I'm originally from Canada, so if you pick up on a weird accent, that's why. But I've been joyfully doing this area of the law for about a decade now, and I've got 2 very little ones, a 2-year-old, almost 3, and a 5-year-old. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Hello, I'm Ann Hill, and I'm not a lawyer. I get that question a lot, but I've spent a lot of years across the table from lawyers negotiating union contracts. I was 25 years in the labor movement with District 925 and Service Employees International Union. After that, I was the regional director for Governor Ted Strickland for 4 years, and then I worked at Metro Health and as the government and community relations director.
The movie or the documentary 9 to 5, The Story of a Movement, tells the story of the 9 to 5 women's labor movement. It started in Boston in the 1970s amongst female clerical workers, office workers. who felt they were, who were underpaid and unable to advance and were being subjected to sexual harassment in the workplace. The movement started in Boston and moved nationally, and one of the places it did move was in Cleveland. There was a big presence in Cleveland, which we'll see here in some of the clips of the film. Good 70s music.
The clerical field is particularly important to women. Women hold 70% of the jobs.
And even one term toward her master's degree. As secretary, you need to be the best you can be. So Patty worked harder, and now she types 110 words per minute.
Janet keeps her hands in finger gymnastics. She can keep it up all day if she has to.
All right, so you too, if you went to 4 years of college and had a master's degree, you too could be someone's secretary. I love it. So that was part of the film that I thought was most appalling. So I want to dive right into the panel. First, I want to start with Anne and tell us, give us an overview of what women workers were looking at during that time.
First of all, there were 20 million office workers in the early 70s. It was the largest occupation in the country, even though most people thought construction workers and hard hats were the largest. It was really women office workers. It was totally different than what we know today. There were no protections on the job. There were a few anti-discrimination laws in effect, but they weren't enforced. The unions had not really bothered to organize women, and certainly not women in the office worker workforce. As you will see if you watch the full 9 to 5 documentary, there was a lot of work that was expected of women office workers that really should not have been part of the job, like making coffee, doing errands. I worked as an administrative assistant at the University of Pittsburgh in the economics department in the mid-70s, and the department chair's secretary regularly went shopping for him to buy his wife presents and to buy his mistress presents. And that was a kind of thing that was common in those days, that male bosses would be asking their secretaries to do personal errands and personal favors.
Amanda, what's your take on that first clip?
I think at first I was just as shocked as you were, and then my reactions kind of quickly went towards being thankful and grateful for how far we've come in such a short time. And even kind of looking at how far we've come, I think one of the things that strikes me is even hearing Anne speak, you look at the workforce today, and you look at things like housekeeping things within offices, even regular offices where you and I work, and a lot of times that type of work seems to fall on women still. I don't know about you guys, but in some offices, if you're organizing events or even something simple like helping out with the kitchen or after an office lunch, a lot of that work ends up still being picked up by a certain demographic. So I just found it interesting to hear that, there are a lot of advancements, but I think there is still a ways to go.
And Anne-Marie.
So I had actually watched this documentary on Netflix, and it is available on Netflix still, before I was asked to speak on this panel. And I thought it was so interesting, not only because of the Cleveland connection, but this movement really started in, I believe, 1972, and that's the year that I was born. And so I was born to a mother who was the child of a Long Island liberal, and my grandma had a philosophy about educating girls. girls that I think was pretty unusual for a person who would have been 104 years old today. And she would always say, it's so important to educate your girls because the unions will represent your sons, and they will always have the opportunity to make a good living and to have rights in the workplace. She said, but your daughters, if you don't give them an education, then they will end up a secretary or a waitress, and if God forbid something happens to them where they're forced to provide for their family, they will not survive and would lead a good life. And that was something that I thought about my grandmother so often as I was watching this movie, because she was also an ardent ERA supporter. And I thought, this is like, because the other thing that I thought about as I was watching the movie is really the value of administrative assistant work even today. And we all laugh at that because we all have been blessed with the opportunity, in large part because of women like Anne, whose shoulders we're standing on, that, you would be, no matter how smart you were, no matter how accomplished you were, you would be relegated to this role. But this role remains vitally important to so many of our practices, but how we view that work and recognizing the dignity of that work, I think, is also something that I was struck by.
Tomorrow is Women's Strike Day, the day that women are being asked to stop typing, stop selling, stop cleaning house, stop doing dishes, and start demanding equal rights with men.
Equal pay for equal work, whether we want it now. Equal pay for equal work, whether we want it now.
A group of secretaries would draw a crowd on any Sunday lunch hour.
About 35 women took over the hallway on the 13th floor.
The harassment and the discrimination that has been going on in my office has got to stop.
Stop the violation of state law with the use of their illegal application form.
He was inspired by the film 9 to 5, where we
inspired the film 9 to 5.
Yes, you did.
The forces of change have been set in motion, and they've been set in motion by the 9 to 5 organization.
All right. This clip I have a little story to tell, and I want to hit our panel here. I had the opportunity to look at a job application from a very prominent law firm in the city, and I won't name any names. And the application was from 1985. And on the application, it asked for your height, your weight, your age, any surgeries that you may have had. So when I heard that, I was like, it was true, back in 1985. So I want to start again with Anne. So again, what laws were, at the time, were activists looking at I'm not going to ask you to quote them, because you asked me not to ask you to quote any laws, but what exactly were they looking at in terms of laws to, to approach their employers with?
Well, there were, Equal Pay Act was actually, there was an Equal Pay Act passed in 1970. But, I keep forgetting this. I'm so sorry. There was an Equal Pay Act passed in 1970, but as I'm sure all of you know, having legislation on the books and enforcing it are two different things. There were also some anti-discrimination laws, federal laws, so that if a company received federal money, they had to abide by those anti-discrimination laws. And in Cleveland, one of the things that 9 to 5, this is the National Association of Working Women, which preceded the union, District 9 to 5, one of the things they did was they went after the banks, because the banks were a huge employer of women office workers, and there was a lot of discrimination in pay and benefits at the banks. And they were able to investigate and gather enough information to present to the Department of Labor and force the Department of Labor to do its own investigation. There was a lawsuit against PNC what's PNC stand for? I forget now. But the bank, PNC. And as a result of that lawsuit, we won huge pay increases, some promotions for women, more women of color getting jobs. And it was a lesson for us that, we could use the law to our advantage.
Can I just comment on that? That's very interesting, and I'm wondering, my first job in Cleveland was at KeyBank, and at the time, they had a 100% tuition reimbursement policy for law school. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to law school for free, and then they changed that my first semester. But it's okay, because I had this corporate experience that I kind of look back on now, but it's interesting that you should say that, because I came to that job in 1994, and I was really struck by how many women and how many minorities were employed in professional capacities in that department that I was in, which was personal trust administration. And as I'm listening to your comment, I'm certain that those opportunities came about because at the time, National City, they were just fierce competitors, had already been held accountable for failure to provide those kind of opportunities. Very interesting.
I mean, one of the things that I think I'm most proud of in terms of the 9-to-5 movement is that we're very conscious of racism in the workplace and of discrimination against people of color. And we were very deliberate in both our demands that we made in different places, as well as our building organizing committees and negotiating committees that were diverse and that were really representative of the workforce.
And I think in these next couple clips, we're going to see the issues with the banks, one of which is National City Bank here in Cleveland, and how the movement came to Cleveland. We'll discuss that a little bit more.
Equal employment opportunity for women and minorities, something long overlooked by the previous administration.
I come from a very traditional Chinese household. Back then, there was nobody who looked like me in Cleveland. I would talk to my parents about wanting to be part of the professional workforce. And my mother said, well, that's just crazy. Who's going to take care of the household? And so, of course, I rebelled against her. I was always in trouble.
So Amanda had the opportunity to speak with Mary and tell us about that conversation.
I reached out to Mary, and I was very glad that I finally was able to connect with her this past week. And it's funny, we're talking about race issues too. When we got on the phone, she says, "You're an Asian lawyer in Cleveland?" She goes, "We didn't have those back then." I said, "Yeah, yes, there are now." So Mary, the woman who you just saw in that clip, she lives in San Francisco now, and she has never gotten her, she never finished her high school degree. She never went to college. And with her experience through 9-to-5 and some of the opportunities that came her way because of this movement, because of her involvement there, she's now the commissioner for this Commission on the Status of Women for San Francisco. She's the director of Government Relations and Community Affairs for the San Francisco Association of Realtors. She's always been active in politics, and it's interesting to show, you see through this documentary, you see a lot of women who gained a lot of leadership opportunities, who gained a lot of experience that they otherwise would not have through the movement and through some of the things that they did there. As you heard in the clip, Mary saw a flyer in a bathroom where she was working. She said she can't remember the building, but it was on East 9th, close to Huron. And she said that, she saw the flyer, ended up thinking of an elderly woman that she worked with and thought, hey, this could be a good opportunity to kind of help fix her situation. So they went to the meeting. She got really involved. Apparently, she volunteered a ton, ended up being hired by the movement to work on events coordination and fundraising. And with what she describes as no experience whatsoever, she just continued to work hard and take in positions either through politics or things like that, but she's clearly gained a lot of leadership skills, which she's utilized in her in her career. So it was very interesting to hear it from her perspective. She didn't consider herself an activist when it all started, and she always even said that, speaking with Anna and some of the others, there was a very purposeful, intentional design behind the movement to not kind of ostracize some women who might not have wanted to join for certain reasons. And so even down to the way that things were marketed, she said that they wouldn't call it protests. They clearly were protests, but they would invite women to actions, a call to action, things like that. And so Mary came from, as you saw, she came from a more traditional Chinese family household. And so she used her money sense to kind of help the movement get a bang for their buck. I think it was national, trying to think how it was phrased. Back in the day, she said that for National Secretary's Day, I think all the bosses would typically get helium balloons. That would be the present that was purchased. And the movement, she says, did not have a whole lot of money. They weren't starting out with a whole lot. So she was she and others kind of came up with a plan to buy really cheap plastic sticks and really cheap balloons. They blew them up by, physically blew them up and stuck it on a stick and kind of gave comparable gifts.
That was in the film.
and so I think it's interesting to see that every woman that was involved with the movement seemingly kind of brought their own experiences to give something to benefit the movement. So it was interesting to hear it from her perspective.
And can you comment what Amanda's talking about is how the movement, 9 to 5 movement, also helped develop women's leadership skills by participating in the movement?
Yes, again, this was something we were very deliberate about because we were women that came out of a workforce where leadership was not encouraged, and so we created training sessions for leadership development. The picture that you saw of all the women sitting at it was a big conference. We did a summer camp every summer and brought women in from all over the country to specifically do leadership training work, and it paid off. Women became more and more confident as they were trained to do public speaking, to deal with the bosses, to sit across the table from them, and make their demands. And so, yeah, it was something that we put a lot of effort into, and we would publish tips on public speaking or whatever it happened to be, tips on negotiating with the boss and so forth. So, yeah.
Yes, Anne.
And just by way of background for people who haven't seen the movie yet, this group started in Boston by a group of office workers at Harvard who, from the movie, it appears they didn't even have health benefits when all of the male employees did. And so they kind of got together as a group and went to the dean or whoever it was, and they were nervous wreck because these are people, and I think this was true of a lot of the people who were interviewed in the documentary, that they had no agency or autonomy in their roles and in their families leading up to this experience. They had no female mentors. They had no experience standing up for their rights. And they went as a group and they had rehearsed it and went to meet with the dean. And they only knew that they were effective because they saw his hand shaking. And so, I think the sight of his hand shaking kind of helped them to recognize that they did have some power, and they grew it more as like an association initially, and but then eventually it shifted into organizing, unionized campaign that went from like an affiliation group called 9 to 5 to a SEIU unionized local that was called District 9 to 5. And one of the things that I thought was so cool about the film and the experiences of these women is that they had a hard time finding a union who wanted to work with them and would show them the kind of respect that they were showing their other groups. And they ended up with SEIU because in part SEIU agreed that they would have all female bargaining leaders, and that these other unions were like, oh sure, we'll take you girls on, but we'll send our own bargaining unit in to negotiate on your behalf. So I thought it was just really, it's really endearing to watch how these women who had been in roles that had been largely subservient roles in the workplace found their voice, and how the movement kind of grew from this very loose affiliation to a serious force to be reckoned with.
All right, and next we're going to learn about National City Bank here in Cleveland.
We had heard of women in the banking industry being passed up for promotions, and men with the same skills being paid 50% more.
That's when we really began learning more about the laws that prohibit discrimination. We weren't really aware of those laws, and we did our research. We learned everything about the law, and we used the law to our advantage.
The meeting here today is really just step number one.
Yes, it'll be the first meeting of many.
We have investigations going on at the 4 largest banks in Cleveland right now, the Department of Labor. There's a huge investigation going on of National City Bank.
Businesses that got federal money had to comply with anti-discrimination laws. You could have their money taken away.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission just strengthens what we've been saying for the last 2 years, that banks are shortchanging women.
Great. So Ann, at the time, they talked about being paid more, about being denied promotions, but what other issues were those workers in National City Bank pursuing?
What were the issues they were pursuing?
Yeah.
Oh, higher pay, higher pay, benefits, promotions, and all of those issues were issues in almost every workplace, right? Women were paid 59 cents to every dollar a man made at that time. But I want to emphasize that respect was also a major issue. And we talked about that openly in our organizing efforts, that women were demanding respect on the job because we knew with respect came power. And ultimately, that's what we wanted. We wanted some power over our workplace, and we wanted something to say about our pay and working conditions, and we knew we could only get that through power because it wasn't going to be just given to us. So respect was a major theme throughout our organizing.
And with respect, and what we saw in a couple clips before, is this was really the start of sexual harassment, and calling it sexual harassment claims. So what was the 9 to 5 movement doing with respect to that in particular?
Right. One of the tactics that we used to involve women in the movement was to do surveys in the workplace, and we would pass out these basic surveys asking about the conditions on the job. And as we collected these surveys, one of the main issues that kept popping out was sexual harassment. And we realized that this was an issue that we really needed to speak to, in addition to pay and promotions and benefits and respect. So we created the 9 to 5 hotline, which was a national hotline, and we had volunteers taking the calls and trained to send people to various resources. But it was amazing the stories that came into that hotline. And the movie highlights some of them. And we also had the worst boss day. We would always every year give awards for the worst boss. And one of the worst bosses was the one who had his secretary sew up his pants while he was in them. And, you know, talk about sexual harassment, as I think Helen says in the movie, today we would call that sexual harassment. So it was an issue that we obviously are struggling with still today, but it was extremely prominent back in the 70s as well.
And Anne Marie, I want you have spoken a lot about the Me Too movement and kind of how this from prior and how it's built up to the Me Too movement.
Sure. So I feel like I turned 50, so like I have this like perspective now, like this retrospective of my experience. And I was thinking about it in preparation for my comments today about when I joined the workforce in 1988. My first job was as a hostess in a restaurant. And when I would walk in the back to get the menus, the cooks would all make comments and holler and scream. And I remember I must have had like an activist in me even then. At 16, I said to the manager, I don't think it's right that they're saying those things. And he said, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I'm like, but I got to go to the kitchen to get the menus. And then the next time that, there was an incident involving a male employee who really quite abruptly and without any warning, like lifted me up on a desk and like started making out with me. And I like pushed him away but I knew in that moment that I couldn't go to the manager because he had already signaled to me that he didn't care. So for these women who in the film who had tolerated this, they said 52% of the people who were surveyed by the 9 to 5 group said that they were regularly subjected to sexual harassment. And I would dare say that the threshold for sexually harassing conduct at that time was much higher than what we think of as sexual harassment. So God knows how many more would have responded that they had been subject to this kind of treatment by today's standard. So I thought that was just very interesting that you gave these women who, had nobody, there was no HR department who was monitoring this. There was nobody who, was saying that this is wrong or you shouldn't have to endure this, that you gave them that recognition and respect, I'm sure was tremendously meaningful. But I did want to talk a little bit about the Me Too movement and my experience now that we're a few years out. I've been representing victims of sexual harassment since the very beginning of my career, and I cannot overstate the impact of the Me Too movement on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. In my 22 years of representing employees across a wide variety of claims and bad conduct and illegal conduct, I have never seen such a rapid transformation. And I hate to say like it's because of Hollywood, because I think we emphasize the importance of celebrity so much, but there has been, including most recently, the signing into law, the end to forced arbitration of sexual harassment claims, which if you're not an employment law practitioner, the problem with that is that it's confidential and that it's one of the problems with that, but it never sees the light of day. So a person who may be accused serially or a company that may habitually tolerate sexually harassing conduct is never really put on trial in any kind of a public forum if they have mandatory arbitration provisions within their employment agreements. So that's like, that is another meaningful shift. But really, the thing that I'm seeing play out in my practice that is so incredible is that, for years we would bring these sexual harassment claims, and the first thing would be to blame the victim. Always blame the victim. Go after the victim's sexuality, her conduct. There was a female lawyer from a major Cleveland law firm that was defending a sexual harassment case that we had brought against a major Cleveland institution. And I wasn't there, but in my client's deposition, she was asking questions like, "Isn't it true that you enjoy attention from men?" And you like when men give you attention in the workplace, and isn't it true that when you went to such and such, event off duty, that you wore come F me boots? This is a question in a deposition. Now, all of that's really bad, but when you consider the fact that the defense in that case was that the conduct never happened, it's all the more appalling. So it's one thing if you're saying, aren't you just the big flirt who brought this on, if the defense is that it was consensual. But in that case, the defense was, this never happened. She made it all up. And so I look at that and I know, because of the Metoo movement, that would never happen today. In fact, I had a case just last week that resolved. The general counsel of this major company, international company, called and said, we're going to make this right. We understand why your client doesn't want to work for our company anymore. We'll negotiate a mutual departure. And we made a reasonable demand, and they basically agreed to pay almost the entire thing, because the shift in the presumption of credibility is remarkable. It used to be that the presumption was the woman was making it up, she was lying, she was exaggerating, and that it took so much to establish that credibility of your client that it was so difficult. But now that people know that this happens and it's been highlighted in such a public way, the presumption of credibility is that it did happen. And it's made all the difference in the how we approach those cases and the results that we're able to get and the way that we're able to vindicate that particular wrong.
Amanda, you represent mainly employers. What's your perspective on the Me Too movement and how that has an effect on employers?
I think the great thing is companies, as you can see, look on social media today. Every company has some post about International Women's Day. And I love that this is a talking point. I love that companies are taking it seriously, and I love that companies have processes and procedures, which I don't think they did back in the day. Even if they did, they certainly take them seriously now. And so companies are more, this is something that is particularly important to companies, not only for the purpose of making sure that there's a safe working environment for women, which is very important to folks now. It's definitely something that companies are more aware of and more focused on. But I think you also see it in terms of business dealings, which I don't think folks anticipated back in the day it would have this type of effect. But even companies bargaining with one another, there's often stipulations about treatment of women and female representation in leadership and things like that. So I think it has trickled down into different aspects of business relations that does signal it is an important aspect of the business relationship and kind of keys that how important it is to companies.
Okay, we're going to hit our last couple clips here. We're running out of time.
We had no reason to believe that arc would not continue.
We do not want our lives to be run and our world changed by the militant women who are demanding what they call a gender-free society.
American women do not want to be called feminists. Everything they stand for is bad and destructive.
I like my life the way it is.
For now, the ERA is dead.
We were going to go on a crusade across the nation and try to do away with the homosexuals.
Moral Majority is not a religious organization. It's political.
All right. I'll bring up the lights. So, what that clip brings to mind is, we sometimes think that since we're all women, we all think alike and have the same opinions, and we clearly don't. And so at that time, how did you try to bring in those women who weren't necessarily aligned with what 9 to 5 was trying to do at the time?
Our approach to women in the workplace was to talk and listen, to talk with people individually. If you watch the documentary, one of the women will talk about how we had 3 lunches a day because we were always meeting women at the workplace, on their lunchtime or after work, to have individual conversations. And it was a struggle. It wasn't as if people just, oh yeah, I want to join this movement. It wasn't easy. So it took a lot of persuasion, education, and meeting women where they were at the time and what their concerns were, listening to their concerns, and trying to speak to their concerns. Now, I wanted to make the point that the 9 to 5 movie with Lily Tomlin, Jane Fonda, and Dolly Parton came out in 1980. And later that year, Ronald Reagan got elected. And in 1981, he destroyed the PATCO union, the union that represented the pilots, or not the pilots, but the air traffic controllers. And so that was a watershed moment. You know, in 1980, we were at the top of our game. We thought, oh, this is going great. Everybody here's 9 to 5, and they have some idea about us because of the movie. And then, you know, this enormous anti-union wave comes with the Reagan administration, and we're at that point swimming upstream in terms of trying to unionize women office workers.
And my last question, real quick, if I could get comments from Amanda and Anne Marie, how has the pandemic kind of shined a light on some of these issues that are still existing today?
I think the pandemic, you know, everybody's kind of read those stories, how the pandemic has shifted and set us back a long way. I think, unfortunately, there are great things about what the pandemic has forced upon the workplace. Things like, you know, for retention, for recruitment purposes, having more flexibility. I don't think there's now a day that, you know, any employer can say, not being able to work from home is no longer really an okay statement for a lot of employers. And so I think there is a level of flexibility that comes with the pandemic, or that has kind of come through from the pandemic. But on the other hand, I think there are other issues that have kind of been brought to light, which, you know, I know President Biden's got a big focus on some of these issues, but even things like childcare. Things like, you know, having families who still have kids at home and have to deal with some work obligations when, you know, it's more a flexible, the workplace has kind of become 24/7, right? There's no limit like there used to be. I used to be able to drive home, and that was kind of my separation of work and home. And now it's just, you wake up, and that was your office for 2 years, 1 year, maybe 2 years. And so I think the struggle is really just gaining back or getting back to some kind of place where there is a separation. I think there is a difficulty for some folks to kind of gain back some sense of life when it's been so meshed for so long.
I kind of have a little bit different viewpoint. I think those are all valid points, but I think, first of all, and I know that I speak for a lot of women when I say it's no longer needs to be a secret that you do in fact have children, right? I mean, like, you know, we, like those of us who have, you know, raised kids in a mostly male-dominated office, like, you don't talk about your kids. You just, like, you definitely don't tell your clients about your kids. They don't want to think of you as anybody's mother. They want to think of you as their bulldog, barracuda, whatever you want to, whatever animal reference you want to make. But I think that now that everybody's seen inside people's homes, they realize that you are a mother and a competent lawyer. I always said I can't drive a minivan, right? There's no way I can drive a minivan because nobody is hiring a lawyer with the idea that she's driving a minivan. And I think that that's no longer necessarily the need to keep that facade of only being a lawyer at the exclusion of everything else. You know, maternal is not as present. But I think for me, as I look at this unique moment in time, I think it's an opportunity, partially because of what Amanda said about DEI initiatives. And, I got a call from a recruiter the other day that said, if you're a female, you don't need a book of business. And, they basically said, so we've gone from a time when women couldn't get hired to a time when, this recruiter is saying, if you're a female, you don't need a book of business and we'll pay you X. And I think that there is, with the Great Resignation and this tremendous effort on DEI initiatives, I think it's an opportunity for you to define, for women to define what they want their work to look like, whether it's in terms of compensation, whether it's in terms of a flexible work schedule, whether it's in terms of, some work from home aspect. I think that, your voice has never been greater than it is right now because A, it's a priority for a lot of businesses and law firms, and B, there's a labor shortage. So, recognizing when you have a unique opportunity, like you did at that unique moment in time before, before automation that made a lot of secretarial functions obsolete, the typing pool and all of those things, and before, the anti-union sentiment, like recognizing that you're in a moment where your voice has more weight, I think is really important.
Anyone have any questions, comments they want to make? We have like a minute. No? Okay. All right. I would like to thank Anne Marie and Amanda for being on the panel, but I also want to give a big round of applause to Ann Hill. But for the work she and her organization did, we would not be here. All right, thank you.
All right, we're going to keep moving right along here. My name is Melanie Farrell. I'm the Director of Board and Leadership Development here at the CMBA. And as Becky mentioned previously, Carrie and I and Becky are the planners of this fabulous day. So I am just going to say just a couple things. One, as Becky mentioned, we're really going to do these I will statements. We're going to talk about it a little bit right before the break, but just start thinking of them or Googling it or whatever you need to do to get ready. I want to thank a couple of our event sponsors. Like Becky said, we're going to spread it out throughout the day, but Tucker Ellis and the Cleveland Metro Parks, thank you for being event sponsors today. And I'm going to introduce Rose Feeney, our facilitator of the next panel, An Environment for Change. She is the Chief Legal and Ethics Officer of the Cleveland Metro Parks, and lucky for us, the president of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association.
Thank you, Melanie. We're going to start with the clip of Youth v. Gov.
Like youth who have come before us in the civil rights movement and other social justice movements, it is often the young among us that shine the light on systems of injustice.
For a lot of young people right now, life is really scary.
Hurricane Matthew hit head on, and it's just so terrifying.
If this drought gets any worse, our way of life will dissolve.
Just as my family's farm is threatened by climate change, so too are the very stability and vitality of our country.
The government is taking actions that are directly contributing to the destruction of our planet.
We have evidence going back to the 50s that government and the fossil fuel industry knew that if they continued to burn fossil fuels, that it would cause catastrophic impacts.
That's when they started editing climate reports.
Is all because of choices that we had no participation in. And I'm scared for my future.
It's the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic.
21 young people ages 11 to 22 are suing the federal government over policies they say are destroying their world.
We are not willing to wait around for someone else's timeline to dictate the trajectory of our lives.
What do we want? Climate justice! What do we want? Now!
You guys are going to trial?
See you in court, government.
I look forward to standing in court with all my fellow plaintiffs. I love you all.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
whether we win the lawsuit or not, we are already making ripples in the world to show real change can come from young people standing up for what they believe in.
All right. Of all the cases working their way through the federal court system, none is more interesting or potentially more life-changing than Juliana versus the United States.
Wow. That is the powerful documentary that we have the director, Christy Cooper, here with us today that we're going to talk a little bit about. Many of you have not seen it. You may have seen it at the Cleveland International Film Festival, for which Christy won an award. And that's why I hunted her down and said she had to be a part of our day today. We are coming off of a summer where we saw a number of wildfires, not only in our country, but around the world. We saw heat waves killing hundreds of people in the United States and Canada. We had floods that devastated Germany and China. And in California, it was the second largest fire in history. And then in the Colorado River, it was declared to have the first water shortage, and that river serves 40 million people in the West. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued its, I believe, 5th report in August, and then they just came out this past week with their 6th report, talking about a lot of these devastating effects. And we are currently engaged in a drought. Colorado has a mega drought, and it's rated the worst in 1,200 years. So all of this is very overwhelming, and we don't want to be weighed down by how devastating all of this is, but it's hard not to be. But what we're going to spend our time today doing is talking with these talented and dedicated women who are working on these important issues, dealing with the environment, dealing with climate change, and celebrating their work, because we can feel hopeful about our situation, even though there are some very devastating facts, when we see some solutions and we see some energy and action. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panel members. You can read the more full biography in your brochure, the program. But so let me start with Director Christy Cooper. You might be surprised to learn that she has her PhD in neuroscience and a master's in microbiology. And we'll talk more about how she came to be a director. But she is a scientist, a documentary filmmaker, and Emmy Award-winning cinematographer. She focuses her storytelling and visual narratives on issues of justice and impact by creating human connections to the most pressing issues of our time. Next to Christy is Beth Naguski. Beth has spent over 40 years working as an environmental and energy attorney, advocate, lobbyist, and regulator in Maine and Ohio. Her work includes acting as a staff attorney, hearing examiner, the Maine Public Utilities Commissioner, an environmental attorney, an advocate, and she currently is on faculty at Case Western Reserve Law School and also at John Carroll University. And then finally, we have Ina Avalon, who is a member of our Emerging Women at our lunch focus group this afternoon. And Ina is an energy and an environmental lawyer with experience in the public and private sectors. Ina is currently an attorney advisor in the District of Columbia Public Service Commission's Office of the General Counsel. So we have a cross-section of professionals here today, and as we have had a number of different preparation discussions, the issue of climate change, the issues impacting our environment, it's going to take all different measures. It's going to take the law, it's going to take film, it's going to take public policy for us to make some good progress. And that's why we have this interesting mix of folks. So you just saw the trailer for Youth v. Gov, and some of you saw and received the link if you requested it ahead of time. But if you want to see the whole documentary, please get your email address to Melanie or Carrie. Melanie is waving back there during one of the breaks, and Christy will share the link. She might have more information down the road that there's more broader distribution, but we are under the cone of silence right now. But it is very powerful. And so, Christy, why don't we start there with, not everybody in the audience is an environmental attorney. And so give us the background on the Juliana versus United States government case, kind of in that forest sort of approach.
Sure. Thanks, Rose, so much. And thanks to Carrie and Melanie for bringing me out here. I live in Bozeman, Montana. So it's my first time to Cleveland, and I'm really honored to be here. So for those of you who don't know anything about Juliana versus the United States of America, this is the first constitutional climate change lawsuit of its kind. The plaintiffs represented in this lawsuit are 21 young people from across the United States. When they first filed this lawsuit in 2015, originally against the Obama administration, the plaintiffs were ages 8 to 19. So we're 6 years down the road now, in the 6th year of this lawsuit, and these plaintiffs are still in this fight. The case has gone up to the Supreme Court 3 times, is back down at the district court now. The young people are waiting on a decision from District Court Judge Ann Aiken as to whether or not they're allowed to amend their complaint to be more in line with the decision ruled by the Ninth Circuit Court. And I'll just give you a brief overview of what their claims are. In this case, so one of the claims is that the government has violated the due process clause under the Fifth Amendment. Our Constitution recognizes and preserves the fundamental right of citizens to be free from government actions that harm life, liberty, property, and personal security. They also have a claim of violation of the equal protection principles of the 14th Amendment. As children, they had no other recourse to demand protection under the Constitution than through the judicial branch. They could not vote, even though some of them have become adults during this process. Many of them still cannot vote. Therefore, they had no representation in the legislative or executive branches of the U.S. government. And these young people will also disproportionately experience the impacts of climate change. And their third claim is that the government has violated the public trust doctrine, which protects the natural resources for all citizens. And it's now being understood that the overarching public trust resource is our life-sustaining climate system. So they have evidence that's going back 60 years through 12 administrations now, that the US administration from both parties have known that CO2 in the atmosphere is rising due to the burning of fossil fuels. They've known that these global temperature rises will correlate to the negative impacts that we are now experiencing. Yet the government has continued to take direct actions to develop and maintain a fossil fuel-based energy system by permitting, authorizing, subsidizing fossil fuel extraction and consumption, despite these activities' contributions being associated to climate change. So I'll kind of stop there.
Sure, and boy, is there a lot there from a legal perspective, and you would think that a documentary focused on this would have been a snooze fest. But the most powerful thing about this documentary are the stories, the personal stories of these children. You fall in love with every one of these children. I like to refer to them as the 21 American versions of Greta Thunberg. But these are the 21 plaintiffs, and they come from all walks of life. The diversity is amazing, and they're representative of that climate change impacts every one of us. And so, Christy, tell us about, because your personal journey is fascinating, how you went from a scientist to a filmmaker and a director, an award-winning director, I might add. And But tell us, because in fact, what you're doing with those personal stories is probably the essence of why you made that change. And so talk to us about that journey you did take.
Yeah, so I was doing basic preclinical research in Europe as a neuroscientist in the field of stem cells. And a big transitional moment happened for me during the Bush-Kerry elections when stem cells became the hot button political topic here in the US, and people were voting based on what their understanding of stem cells was and what their knowledge or lack of knowledge was. And so that was a real pivotal moment for me as a scientist, realizing that we as scientists need to talk about our research and we need to be better at presenting it to the public and increasing that public awareness and understanding of science. And to make a long story short, I slowly made the journey towards science communication. I ended up coming back to the US in 2009 to get my master's in fine arts in science and natural history filmmaking. And one of the very early projects that I worked on, I went down to Louisiana during the BP oil disaster, and my intention was to work with the scientists to help to get the science out, to get the data and the facts out. And one of the amazing people that I met on the boat, who was captaining the boat to bring the scientists out into the bay before the oil had come in, was an indigenous man from the tribe, from the Takapa-Ishak tribe that live outside of the levee system in southwest Louisiana. And I ended up connecting with him and his brother who were captaining the boat, and they invited us to their home and invited us to stay with them for 2 weeks. And over the course of those 2 weeks, I really gained an understanding of what it means to be on the front lines and what it means to come from a marginalized community and to see the impacts that these individuals have been experiencing due to the 50, 60 plus years of the oil industry in that region, with over 10,000 miles of pipelines through the saltwater marshes of that area. And that was really a transitional moment for me to realize that the stories that needed to be told were the human stories, the human impacts to these injustices. And a subsequent project that I then worked on was a short film series focused on the very first youth plaintiffs here in the US. In 2011, Julia Olson, who is the lead counsel on the Juliana case, she founded an organization called Our Children's Trust. And on Mother's Day of that year, she filed legal actions in every state across the country, as well as the first federal case. And I came on board as a collaborative project with Witness, which is a social justice human rights organization. It's Peter Gabriel's foundation, to do a series of 10 short films about these young people. And their stories were based on their standing declarations. So we were able to submit these films to the judges as part of the evidence in their cases, as well as to President Obama. And Lisa Jackson, at the time, the head of the EPA, actually reached out to us asking if she could purchase one of the DVDs, and we let her know she could have them for free and that she was a defendant on the case. So that this has been a long journey for me of really trying to put the focus on the human part.
Right, and you know, it's one thing to describe and talk from the plaintiff's perspective in the briefs, but the film just brings them to life as we see in Youth v. Gov. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. And you know, we talk a lot on International Women's Day about career paths. You know, to take a step back, there's no one career track. It could be so creative and take you in so many different ways, which Christy's story tells us. And speaking of career paths, Beth, 40 years of work in this realm. Begin to talk to us a little bit about it. But, we want to hear about your work in Maine and the public policy work you were able to accomplish.
Sure. Thank you very much, Rose. And hello to all. And I do encourage you to watch Youth v. Gov. It's a very, very powerful, very, very powerful film. So I started working, I graduated from Case Western, it will be 40 years this spring, Western Law School, and I moved to Maine, and I started working at the Public Utilities Commission, as Ina did here, and I started working on energy and quickly became to the conclusion that the biggest energy and environmental threat facing us was climate change. This was back in the 80s. I then began working for an environmental group and worked on clean energy, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate. And what I can say is I've worked on it primarily energy and climate for 40 years from the perspective of the nonprofit sector. From the private sector, I worked for the renewable power industry. I worked for the governor of Maine as the energy director, and then I worked, and then I moved to Cleveland. And what I can say, the difference between Maine and Ohio proves what I try to reinforce with my students all the time. Policy matters. The policies of Ohio when it comes to energy and particularly clean energy are night and day from the policies of Maine. You probably all know about HB 6 and the gutting of Ohio's renewable and clean energy standards. Maine has a standard which is set a goal of 100% clean energy in the future, as has California, New York, and other states. They have adopted policies that are moving towards carbon-free energy. And Ohio, as you know, and I think primarily because it is a more red state, we also have a coal industry. We have a natural gas industry here. It's the renewable energy industry here is just not able to get a foothold. And I worked on the permitting for the Icebreaker Wind Project, the proposed demonstration project in Lake Erie. And I can tell you, it was like beating your head against a wall. And so I think that, I started working on climate, like I said, in the late 80s, before the first IPCC report came out. It acknowledged that climate change was happening, that it was at least in part due to human emissions of greenhouse gases. But the language there was much more uncertainty about the timing and the magnitude and how serious it was going to get. And with every IPCC report, it has just gotten more and more certain, more and more clear. We originally thought that this was going to be a problem that our children and our grandchildren were going to experience. Now we're seeing, we're experiencing it. Not so much here in Cleveland, but we look around the country and we see the impacts everywhere, from sea level rise to, as Rose said, wildfires, drought, more intense storms. And so I wanted to just read, when the report came out last week, the 6th assessment report from Working Group 2, the takeaway was that humanity has a brief and rapidly closing window to avoid a hotter, deadly future. And the UN Secretary General basically said, "I have seen many scientific reports in my time, but nothing like this." That it was an atlas, and it is an atlas. I've skimmed it, of human suffering, and a damning indictment of a failed climate leadership. And then one of the co-chairs said that, and we've known this for a long time, we have the technology to get to safe levels and keep temperatures at 1.5 degrees, which is what the scientists are telling us. We have to get to no more than a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, or we're going to face very serious consequences. We have the technology. It's not a failure of technology. We don't have political will. And, I can go on and on about the failure of political will, and I won't. But I think that, that is one of the biggest takeaways.
Right, and the importance of policy. And my colleague Priscilla Rojas, who's here today, she encouraged me to read Ibrahim Kendi, whose work on racism, talks about the importance of policy. We've got to change policies, and your work, Beth, has done that. You had successes in Maine, not so much in Ohio, but we're going to keep working at it. And you're inspiring your students at Case and John Carroll, my alumni. So keep at it. Keep at it. We got to keep positive. Now, Ina, you don't have as many years on this front, but you are in it. You're in the battle. Talk to us about, because you've been in the private sector with Taft and you've been in the public sector. Do you feel one sector is better than the other, or what are the differences? What do you enjoy in either of those sectors?
So I'm actually really thankful that I had experience in both sectors. When I started in the public sector at the Ohio Attorney General's office in their environmental enforcement section. And that was a really pivotal moment for me in my career because it solidified exactly why I went into this area. It was there when I was enforcing on environmental violators that I got to see exactly what we're talking about, which is the impact on human life and what happens when people don't follow the law. So, for example, one of the cases that I worked on pretty early, we were enforcing on a public water system operator who he operated a public water system for a trailer park. And there were water outages, he's not testing the water, he's just jacking up the chlorine. And, that all sounds kind of like, okay, but what does that mean? And what that means is that people don't have drinking water. They don't have water to bathe their children. They were taking their children to rest stops to bathe them. They were, you have old people, young people, poor people drinking over-chlorinated water because we all need water. And I felt like in that role, I really developed this sense that, when you think about clean air and you think about clean water and where your waste goes, that these are really fundamental rights that everyone is entitled to, regardless of your socioeconomic status or your race or, anything like that. These were things that felt very important to me that I think on a daily basis, we all kind of take for granted until those things go missing. And then your whole day is just ruined. And for some people, that's their everyday. They're struggling with that kind of battle. The private sector was great too. I didn't really have the battle of conscience because I did work for a lot of good clients who actually genuinely were trying to do the right thing. And that experience was amazing because it introduced me to, basically every federal environmental law under the sun, as well as some international environmental issues. I spent a lot of time working for renewable developers, which was a great experience, and is what launched me into my current role with the DC Public Service Commission. So I am back in the public sector. And the reason that I came back was really because of what we're talking about, which is policy is everything. So DC, unlike Ohio, is a very aggressive jurisdiction when it comes to climate change. When you talk about public utilities commissions and they're regulating your electric and gas utilities, in the past, historically, they're just concerned about reasonable rates, safety, reliability. Do you have power? Do you not have power? They're not thinking about the impacts on the environment. But now more and more jurisdictions, including DC, have mandates to consider the effects of global climate change, as well as, their public commitments that they've made to their citizens. So DC's taken a number of actions, including expanding their renewable portfolio standard to 100% by 2032, committing to go totally carbon neutral by 2050. We've set up working groups to, come up with metrics for how we're going to evaluate utility action, including, should we have them report their greenhouse gas emissions to us? We've required our utilities to file climate business plans explaining to us how over the next 5 years and over the next 30 years, they're actually going to achieve the district's climate goals. And so for me, I think It's hard to say which one is better. I think there's a lot of work to be done in both, but right now, given that I'm able to have a more policy-focused position, I would say that kind of is, hitting a chord with me in terms of wanting to affect change in an entire industry that hasn't really considered these aspects before, as opposed to more of a company-by-company basis, which tends to happen in the private sector.
Yeah, excellent. And just you're drawing on both your experiences in both sectors to plow forward with now your work with the Utilities Commission. So excellent. Oh, Beth, tell the audience this, because this was really interesting, how you came to be interested in environmental issues with that non-traditional sort of education.
Well, I can blame my mother, and who had a tremendous... Or thank her, yes. So she sent me to a science camp when I was in high school on Hardwood Island in Maine with the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And I came back from that 2 weeks there and said, Mom, I'm not going back for my senior year of high school. And she had coincidentally found an advertisement for a school that traveled around the country. So I spent I got onto the program, and I spent my senior year of high school traveling the country and sleeping in a tent every night on the ground and visiting. We called it, our classroom was Wild America. So we went from Sturbridge Village to Williamsburg. We spent a week or 10 days with an old order Mennonite farmer. We went snorkeling. We went to the Southwest and worked on archaeological digs. So our classroom really was Wild America.
Isn't that amazing?
And I went from there to get my undergraduate in natural sciences and education, and then ended up going to law school.
So thank your mom, Beth.
I do.
Now,
I thank her every day.
Yeah, the Metro Parks has nature-based preschools, but we don't have a year-long program on the road in nature. Christy, back to you and the film. What has been the reaction of different film festival audiences that you've been at?
Yeah, so we premiered the film at DOC NYC in November of 2020, and we've been doing the film festival circuit since then. We were here in Cleveland last year for the Cleveland International Film Festival. To date, we've been in 51 film festivals around the world, and much to my surprise, we've won 25 awards, so pretty good batting average. And I really think that it's because of these young people, because of their bravery and their willingness to go, not only through this process of being plaintiffs in a lawsuit, not knowing how much of their childhood this was going to take up, but also having the bravery and patience to work with me for 6 years on creating this film. And I mean, the reactions have been amazing from all ages. I mean, we've had 8-year-olds that have watched the film and have been so inspired and see themselves on screen, and older generations that feel motivated and see themselves to some degree in these kids through the work that they have done their entire lives. So it's been really encouraging to get the feedback from this film. We actually had Secretary John Kerry reached out to us and wanted to see the film in his lead up going to Glasgow for COP26. So we're now working with his office and doing some internal Biden administration outreach about the case. We've just had really amazing folks who have come on to support us. Jane Fonda brought the film to her Friday fire drills Thursday night movie night that she does with her folks, and it's been a really amazing run. We're really excited that hopefully we can announce very soon that the film will be available very widely. So hopefully if you miss the film here at this conference, you will be able to see it soon streaming.
Excellent. And we might have some budding film producers and directors in the audience because we have the partnership with the commission, the Film Commission, as well as Cleveland State's School on Film and Media. So come ask questions, grab Christy right after. I think so that would be great. So ask some, the technical questions too are interesting. We talked a little bit about that Ohio's a little bit of a red state, but really at this point, there's the climate change is a bipartisan issue among younger people. And we see that because while we thought Jimmy Carter was our great environmental president, but putting solar panels on the White House, we did see him shift towards a pro-coal policy as fuel prices started. And isn't it interesting that we have this crisis right now with the war in Ukraine and Europe is lamenting the fact they didn't get to renewables sooner. So not only for climate change purposes, but for geopolitical matters, it's also important to take a look at some of our energy policy. But as in our final minutes here, unless there's questions from the audience, jump to the microphone. What gives you the most hope when you think of climate change? In the work, in the people you talk with, where do you find hope? Because we certainly all can feel a little discouraged by some of the facts that are out there.
Yeah, I guess I would say, bringing up Ukraine, I heard President Biden today. I was actually late to the lunch because I was listening to what his policy is going to be now on oil and gas from Russia. And I guess the answer is to open up more drilling here in the U.S. So that's discouraging, but I try to focus always on, we don't have a choice. We don't have an alternative but to be hopeful and to move forward. And for me, the young people and this younger generation and their willingness to pick up this baton and their inclusivity in the movement and how they really have brought in so many other issues, racial justice and all kinds of equity issues that have always been related to environmental issues and environmental justices. And I feel very hopeful about that, about the inclusivity and the intergenerational aspect of the work.
Well, I think the primary reason that I'm the last chapter of my career is teaching is because I want to pass the baton to the next generation to take up the fight. The window is certainly closing on how much time we have to act, but I do think the younger generation is certainly creating a social movement around the issue and putting pressure on us because this is a huge intergenerational equity as well as a lot of other equity issue. But it's a huge intergenerational equity issue that it's our generation that has caused the problem that they will feel primarily the impacts of. And so I think we need to listen to them, and I think they are, Greta and others are powerful voices. And my hope is that, before it's too late, we actually do listen because it's not like I said, it's not a failure of technology, it's a failure of political will.
I think what gives me the most hope is the ability of people to innovate when certain efforts get shut down. As we've seen here, the federal government in this case, but we have seen industry step up. We've seen state and local government step up. We've seen a lot of grassroots efforts to address this. And I think if eventually there will be enough mounting pressure that the people who kind of resist the fact that we need to act and we need to act soon, that won't be a sustainable position for much longer. And so I think that gives me a lot of hope that, people are very resilient and they're very creative.
I agree, and all three of you give me hope that the work that you're doing, coming from the different perspectives and whether it's law, public policy, or film, the advocacy. So thank you so much for coming today, and thank you for the work that you are doing. Let's give them a round of applause.
We're going to bring us back here for the second half. I have these cards. Flag me down. I can hand them out, make it rain. Okay, so I wanted to thank our break sponsor, which was McDonald Hopkins today, for all those yummy, yummy snacks. And I want to thank a few more of our event sponsors, Hennis Communications, Franz Ward, and Han Lozier. Thank you all for your support of today's program. And now I'm going to introduce our facilitator of our third panel, which is Building Our Community, Immigration in Northeast Ohio. And it will be facilitated by Renuka Raman, who's corporate counsel at Big Lots. Thank you, Renuka.
Thank you, Melanie. Today we have with us Sarah and Erin. I would just give them a quick introduction, and then we'll move on to our presentation and the discussion. The flow would be presentation, discussion, presentation in between, and then at the end of it, we would take questions. If anyone has anything, feel free to it. If you can raise your hands, and we can probably pass on the microphone to you. Sarah Felony is a partner with Thomson Hines. She leads the immigration group that advises employers across the globe, including a number of Fortune 500 companies, on global talent management and cross-border employment issues. Her immigration practice has three primary focuses: developing strategic immigration policies for employers consistent with their global talent acquisition and retention goals, supporting our clients' immigration sponsorships for their employees, and advising the clients on compliance with immigration-based regulations. Sarah has also held a leadership position with Thomson Hines Spotlight on Women program. Last year, she stepped down from her role as a firm-wide chair on the Women's Initiative after more than 5 years in the role. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. The second panelist is our Erin James. She's an associate with Herman Legal Group, LLC, where she handles complex immigration cases. She graduated from the Case Western Reserve University Law School, and she's a member of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association and Norman S. Minor Bar Association, where she has volunteered in various places, including Elsa Bryant Village. She's a mentor to the law students and has served as co-chair for Citywide Mentoring Committee. Currently, Erin is part of the executive board, where she serves as a member secretary. She is recently named part of National Black Lawyers Top 40 Under 40. In her spare time, she likes to spend time with her family and friends, travel, try new restaurants, and watch documentaries. That would be interesting, right? Documentaries, I would like to know later on what is that. Well, moving on to our presentation for today, I would like to start off with a very general idea of immigration policy or the system that we have in the US. If I have to sum the entire, let's say, immigration laws in one word, it would be intent, right? What is the intent of the foreign national when he's coming into the country determines the type of visa, the type of things that he would like to have. Issuance of visa is through a consulate that would be basically reviewing and reviewing the applications and determining whether he can eligibly enter, whether his entrance is legal or not. Based on that category, we have here four types, broad classification. So immigrant visas are issued to foreign nationals who intend, emphasis on the word intend, to live permanently in the United States. So some of the examples would be family-based law, visa, employment-based visa, permanent residency. These ones, the intent is to stay here for a longer period of time. The non-immigrant visas are for foreign nationals who wish to enter the US on a temporary basis for any number of reasons, including tourism, business, medical treatment, study, or even temporary work. That goes into that classification, which would be visitor visa, business visa, transit visa, student visa, to name a few. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, a refugee is an alien who generally has experienced past persecution or has well-eminent fear of future prosecution in his own country on account of race, religion, nationality, or even political opinion. So that's the category that falls under refugees in a general definition. So these are the people who basically have nowhere else to go, and they want some kind of support from another country, and our US system is welcome to have them as well as part of our integration and building the community. The last category of immigrants would be the undocumented immigrants. The easy way to remember that is none of the above categories. If you don't fall in any of the above, you are definitely undocumented. He's a person who does not have the legal right to stay or even enter into the country. There is a misconception that undocumented immigrants are more likely to commit violent and crime. And that's the reason why there's a lot of hue and cry about this whole section of people. However, statistics show otherwise. For instance, there is a number of documented immigrants in the US tripled during the period 1990 to 2013. However, during that period, the rate of violent crime in the US actually dropped to almost 50%. So there is a lot of myth and misconceptions about immigrants, and that's kind of today's highlight on topic, where we want to try and cover as much as we can in terms of understanding how they are building into the community and not really harming the community. Here we have in the schedule, if you look at it, this is basically in reverse terms of wages, how they have been contributing, how immigrants have been contributing to our society. So if you look at the chart there, it reveals that most foreign-born US residents have an income of at least $75,000, which is about 23%. If you go to the last block there, that's kind of the income that an immigrant is actually generating. Only 18% of immigrants in America earn between $25,000 to $34,999. So even the myth that immigrants lower the income wage is kind of negated by these facts that are presented to us here. Only 1.7 have income between the range of $1,000 to $9,099, the first column, which is exactly almost the same as for a native-born American. So here, if you look at it, it's really showing us how the impact is more positive and high. I would like to show you one more presentation, one more chart here. In this one, if you look at it, this is a further subset of the immigrants. This one is with respect to women, immigrants, how they have been in the community and how they are being a contributor to the community. There are more than 23 million female immigrants in the United States today, and they are a formidable presence in the US society and the economy. Over 1/3 of immigrant women in the labor force worked in management, business, science, and arts occupation in 2018, while just under 1/3 worked in service occupations. That's the chart down below. If you read it up towards that, that's how you will be able to figure out the way foreign-born nationals have actually been a positive contributor to our society. These and more in number of data can be produced to show how immigrants are contributing to the society more than one way. I would like to pause here and turn to our distinguished panelists here for today and try to explain or try to even uncover more of these in real and practical experience of what we have here. Sarah, how do you think women have embraced this opportunity?
Thanks, Renuka, and thanks for having us here today. So I would suggest that I have seen women internationally be able to take advantage of the opportunities in the U.S. First, perhaps by coming to the U.S. for education as foreign national students. And I will make a point, as I just used the word foreign national, that when Renuka was using the word alien earlier, that is directly from the immigration laws. That is a term that is used in our law still today. I very much object to the use of that term in our laws, and I would suggest that we should, find a way to adjust those to move to foreign national myself. But I just wanted to make a point that Renuka was quoting directly from the laws and use of that term. But we have many foreign nationals that are very much sought after by U.S. universities. And they can come here, pursue a degree, and then the immigration system sets up a runway for them upon graduation to have work opportunities that do not immediately require an employer to sponsor and make an investment in that foreign national. Our system is set up so that foreign national graduates of U.S. universities have at least 1 year of work authorization available to them. They then can expand that out to 3 years if they pursue a STEM degree and work for certain employers. So this is a way where they can then show their contributions to an employer, and then the employer can see the value, and then the employer can move on to sponsor them for work authorization. And I have seen many women be able to leave environments in their home country where they would not have had the same opportunity. And on International Women's Day, I think we can all agree that there is still a lot to be done in the U.S. for pay equity and movement of women into executive positions, leadership positions, et cetera. But we are far ahead of so many other regions in the world. And so women coming here can have opportunities that would not be available to them in their home country.
That's wonderful. That actually explains more on why we have so much data that immigrants are actually positive contributors to the society. Erin, in your experience, how do you think women immigrants have contributed to the community?
Immigrant women tend to be integral members of society. They tend to go into industries that support communities and actually spur economic growth. And I think you have some of them listed here, such as healthcare, education, retail, and food service, just to name a few. In addition, like we've seen during the pandemic, for instance, many immigrant women actually served on the front lines as healthcare workers. So that was another way that they were contributing. Additionally, many immigrant women work in manufacturing, and they've helped during the pandemic with food supply chains. Another way that they contribute is by taking advantage of our treaty investor visas. And not just that, but they also, by investing into the region. So some women may come here and start their own business, and then others may use the treaty investor visas to invest in the region. And actually, immigrant women tend to start businesses at a greater rate than American-born women. And I've seen in some cases where women will start a business like, let's say, a restaurant, which not only introduces their culture to the community, but that restaurant kind of becomes part of the social fabric of the community itself, and they're providing jobs. So those are just a few of the positive aspects that immigrant women bring to the community.
Knowing what we know now, that it is having a great impact, Sarah, do you think that the U.S. corporations are now more open and more comfortable hiring from abroad? How do you think that that aspect has changed in so many years?
So I've been working in this space for 20 years, and I have seen it expand significantly. When I first started out in the employment immigration space, at Thompson Hine at least, almost all of our clients tended to have a international footprint themselves. And so it aligned very naturally that they were sponsoring in the US for work visas. But then I had seen a gradual change where small startups that would have thought maybe they would never have an immigration need, they were going to the universities and recruiting for the best engineer, the best scientist, and they were finding many times that it was a foreign national. So they started to then get into immigration sponsorship. What I now see is that companies are not only more comfortable with it, but they are strategic about utilizing an immigration sponsorship program as a way to achieve their talent needs. And COVID really accelerated this because companies have now discovered that they don't need everyone to be where they are to do the work. So companies are now saying, you know, we could open up a global search and we could say to a candidate, if you're in Belgium and you want to stay in Belgium, you can still take on this role. We will get a work visa that will allow you to come into the US for meetings and have you still integrated within the leadership team that might be here. But you don't need to relocate your family for this role now in the US. Whereas previously, even when companies became really comfortable with an immigration strategy, they still tended pre-COVID to want the foreign national to be in the US, right? So we're going to get you a full-time work visa that you're going to come to the US. And now there is much more of an openness to, we can take a look at the global talent wherever they are and pursue them for it. So I think it's been great. I also think that companies are becoming far more strategic about how to source the foreign national talent, and not simply waiting for the foreign national talent to respond to a posting that they have or their resume to come across their, desk of the hiring manager. I have worked with companies to build pipeline programs where the company partners with the university and they develop an internship program for students that are in a particular hard-to-find skill set area. So let's say digital technology or software development, data analytics. And that pipeline program might purposely target foreign national students because they tend to have a higher rate of enrollment in some of those programs. And the companies build an internship program. They get to know the student while they're pursuing their degree. They then graduate, they get the work authorization, and then we're putting them onto a work visa. So this is where companies are being very strategic in not only are we willing to sponsor, but how do we find the foreign national talent that we want to sponsor?
That's wonderful. That's like a huge shift. Interesting that you brought up the COVID aspect to it. I think in general, I have noticed a bigger trend on going remote. I see a lot of people actually only looking for remote jobs now. And then the US corporations primarily who are always in person and never had this remote concept or even working remote means you're just vacationing. That has completely changed with the pandemic. I think that's a huge positive in respect of the pandemic that has created, as I see.
And I've seen where companies are not waiting for the associate, the candidate, to say to them, you know, what's your policy on remote work now? Would I be able to do this? They're putting directly in the posting, remote work can be anywhere.
Yep. Now, with that opportunities, I want to show you one more slide here. Let's see. Yep. So initially, we started off our discussion with the different types of immigrants. Why is that important? Because each of the type of immigrant faces different challenges based on their status. So this is actually a table from the data of Department of Homeland Security that indicates that female immigrants are more likely to come through the family-based class of admissions as opposed to women, less employment and more family-based. But I think this trend is slowly changing with the fact that a lot more women are doing more self-employed businesses, and also they're coming for job opportunities as such, as we had earlier discussed. So Erin, do you think the path for women immigrants is a very simple one? Do you think it's different for women as opposed to men? What do you think are the challenges that they face?
Well, like you stated, the majority of women, around 70%, come through family-based petitions. And that creates a challenge in and of itself because in many cases, family-based petitions tend to take much longer than, let's say, employment-based. And it makes these immigrant women vulnerable to abuse, actually. And they become susceptible to certain types of abuse where the partner may use their immigration status as a way to keep them from leaving the relationship or marriage. And some of them may be susceptible to human trafficking as well, which is unfortunate. But there is hope and a pathway for women. The Violence Against Women's Act, which was signed into law in 1994, provides a way for women to self-petition. They don't have to have their abuser on the petition. It's by themselves. And they can even put a safe address so that the process stays confidential. And the petitions are sent to Vermont, where specially trained officers will analyze. They take special care in analyzing the petitions. They know what to look for, and that gives a woman a way to, let's say she has children here and she doesn't want to leave, but she doesn't want to stay with her partner. She can get a green card, become a permanent resident on her own, and stay with her children, for instance. So although there are challenges, the VAWA, as we call it, does provide a comprehensive and supportive way to help women. So that would be a challenge and also a way to help them as well.
Renuka, do you mind if I just make a comment on, I do think it's important to note that certainly the employment-based pathway for immigration in the US does not make any distinction on gender. And here you'll see that employment-based is much lower than immediate relatives and family for both men and women. So employment-based just doesn't provide the same opportunities as family-based because the employment categories, most of them are statutorily capped. So there's a limit on how many people can pursue an employment-based path to the US each year, right? So I just want to I think it's important for us just to show that both men and women utilize employment-based lower than the family-based. And women certainly have the same opportunities on the receiving side here of the US of having access to those employment opportunities. there may be a barrier on their home country side of having the same resources to be able to come here, having the same opportunities to be encouraged to pursue employment, pursue education, et cetera. But I want to make sure that we didn't leave anyone with the impression.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really a good insight, because sometimes the data can be seen very differently if it's not presented the way it's supposed to be, because this table didn't specifically say anything of that. So that was really a good point that we had for today. Sarah, in your experience, I just want to understand, do you see any change or differently where Northeast Ohio women, in terms of having any impact differently over the last 20 years?
Northeast Ohio? Well, I think Northeast Ohio is a wonderful community for foreign nationals. I think we have tremendous job opportunities here. We have healthcare industries, we have manufacturing, we have professional services. I think that the community that you then can become involved in, we have a globally ranked orchestra, we have a top ranked playhouse, theater. You know, I think that the opportunities that it can provide for someone coming from a different region are wonderful. I know that there's been a lot of growth in building a culture of acceptance through, you know, Global Cleveland and other initiatives that are working hard. Cleveland State, I know, is also very much focused on not only creating more opportunities for international students, but also looking at how do they help then create that runway to then provide the opportunities for entrance into the business community, because that's the way that we can then, you know, help retain that international talent that we brought here to the U.S. and not lose them to either another area in the U.S. or another region. So I think that Northeast Ohio does provide tremendous opportunities.
You want to add anything, Erin?
Yeah, I just say that I agree, and I do notice that a lot, especially when you look at the refugee population or asylum population. They do tend to open businesses and start churches, and those are great ways to kind of help start building a community out.
It's interesting you brought the Global Cleveland and the other communities that are helping. I would just like to tell the group here that there is one group which is formed in December 2020. It's Business Groups of Ohio formed together, Ohio Business for Immigration Solutions, or they call it OBIS. They are actually, the reason for forming them was mainly to educate policymakers of the impacts of various immigration policies and economic contributions of immigrants to Ohio's economy. So this group, I wouldn't say it's society or anything, it would more like a group, not-profit group that actually supports sensible public policy solutions that raise above partisan and rhetoric and meet the challenges of the current immigration system while recognizing the value contributions of the current immigration state. Our bar association, that's CMBA, in last year in August, signed to be a member of this group, and thus we are also contributing to be in our efforts to positively towards the society. So that's something that we are doing as a group. In general, now I would lead to to open the question to both of you, who can pick whoever wants to go first. I wanted to understand, do you have any suggestions at the policy level that you would like to highlight today, or wish I had this, maybe wish they did this, like the wish list if you have, and if you want to share something like that, please go ahead.
Well, I'd say as far as a wish list goes, that probably the Immigration Service would move faster because, it takes
That's like a
years.
genie wish. Will never
Right,
be
I know, but if we're doing the ultimate wish list, and I'd also say, practically protecting Violence Against Women Act and promoting small businesses, because I think that also helps immigrant populations as well.
So I answer this through the lens of doing exclusively employment-based immigration, and I can say that probably all of my clients would have a wish list of wanting there to be an expansion on the number of work visas that are available, and to expand the types of roles for which we would make work visas available. So for some of the less skilled roles, you can get a visa for some of those roles for seasonal help, but we don't have a permanent type of visa where an employer can hire someone into the landscaping industry, for instance, or hospitality, and have that person employed continuously. So they're having to train and invest in new employees on a recurring cycle. So I would expand the types of roles for which you can get visas and the number available.
Thank you. I think there's one last slide, which leads to our Q&A, and thank you for having us, listening to us, and having you spent your afternoon here with us. Anyone for any questions, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
This one's for Sarah. Are there demographic requirements in those statute visas? So we saw the slide that said, there were more work visas given to men. Excuse me. Are there demographic requirements in that statute that say so many to certain people?
So I don't believe that it's, I would think of it as more men sought work visas than they were given to more men. So there's not any criteria on any work visa that relates to gender demographic. There are some work visas that are targeted for citizens of certain countries. So there is a work visa available for Australian citizens that largely mirrors the H-1B visa. Those usually come through, sort of like trade purposes or some sort of like reciprocal. There's usually a reciprocal reason that we would expand that based on what Australia maybe makes available to US citizens, for instance, or something along those lines. But not gender demographic. That's not a criteria in any way.
Anyone? Yeah.
I'll just shout from here. Is the labor shortage that's happening now likely to have any impact on numbers of visas? Have you heard any movement in legislation to increase, whether it's H-2Bs or H-1Bs to fill spots in companies?
So I'm not frankly optimistic. Sure, the question was the current labor shortage that we're experiencing, might that be the motivation for Congress to finally take some sort of action to expand the number of international work visas that would be available? I would not expect that to be the precipitator, especially because it's not as if we've necessarily lost U.S. workers. It's that the U.S. workers are stepping away from the roles. But I have not heard anything to suggest that that might spark action sooner rather than later.
First of all, thank you so very much for touching some subjects related to COVID as well. One of which is the burnout that the healthcare workers are experiencing nowadays. I wonder whether large law firms like Thompson Hine are currently involved in trying to attract, for instance, Filipino nurses who are willing and eager to come to the U.S. and step in, if there's any strategy that large law firms and their immigration and employment sections have in order to enhance the healthcare workforce during and post COVID, hopefully. What are your thoughts, both of you, Sarah and Erin? Thank you.
So I'll offer some initial thoughts on it. So I do not do much in the healthcare space. I have a partner in our Cincinnati office, and her immigration practice is largely focused in the healthcare space. And if you want to give me your card, I'd be happy to connect you with her, if you wanted to connect in any way on that. But I know that there's a lot of employers that are in the healthcare space that are continuously looking to bring in foreign nationals to the U.S. to fill those spots. Now, there was, during COVID, a significant barrier to actually getting those individuals here. So they might have been perfectly eligible for the visa, and the company might have been willing to sponsor them, but the consulate was closed. There's a travel ban. Yes, there's an exception for healthcare workers, but we have to work through that exception. And the sort of delay that created on the delivery system of this working, I think was really felt. But I don't think it's for a lack of U.S. healthcare employers not looking internationally. I think it was on the actual execution of that policy.
I have a quick question as I was thinking through. Do you think there is a change in the policies from the previous administration to the current administration? Has anything moved faster, slower, anything at all?
I'd say that things are moving a bit faster. We tend not to get as many requests for evidence, which can slow down your process by months. And people are more willing, at one time, they cut off even the phone system. So at least now you can call and get an appointment scheduled. It's not as easy as it was years ago when we had this system called InfoPass where you could just go ask your question. If they needed to stamp your passport, they do it right there. Now you have to call, they'll look into it. If they find that you have a good cause, then you can come in. But I will say it's definitely a different feeling, and not getting those RFEs definitely helps.
I almost think the easier way to answer that, instead of explaining how the current administration has changed from the prior, is to say that the prior administration had more changes in a single term than I had seen over 20 years in immigration cumulatively.
That's interesting. And I think hopefully those are not going to be impediments in going forward in the future.
There is certainly a rollback, to sort of what we had known previously in many ways.
I think that's positive change, right? Going forward. If anyone has any more questions, or thank you, lovely ladies. And on behalf of our panelists, I wish you all a wonderful Women's Day celebration.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move right on to our fourth and final panel of the day. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I want to thank a few more sponsors this afternoon, Voorhees and Manzer Gavin. Thank you both for sponsoring this afternoon. And we're going to move into our fourth panel, which we're calling Writing the Allyship. Our moderator for the day is Rachel Israel. She is counsel with Baker Hostetler. Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a fantastic day, and I'm so glad that you're here for the last presentation, the last 40 minutes. I think it's going to be, the best of the presentations so far today. My name's Rachel Israel, and I am counsel at Baker Hostetler. I'm also very honored to serve as the moderator for this incredible panel that we have today called Writing the Allyship. And we're joined today by three absolutely amazing women. And they can teach us a lot about how to be good allies, how to find the intersection between us as women and other members of our community who may be marginalized in different ways, and how we can all work together to really create an entire framework and network of support for each other. Bethany Studenik and Chinanya Camara are co-founders of Enlightened Solutions, a nonprofit organization here in Cleveland that's dedicated to research and advocacy to support marginalized people. Tara Coleman is an accomplished attorney and a very lovely human, and she happens to be my colleague at Baker Hostetler. She's also the co-chair of the CMBA's work group promoting and growing white allyship. So let's start with an introduction to Enlightened Solutions. Bethany and Chichi, can you tell us what kind of work Enlightened Solutions is doing for us here in Cleveland?
Am I on? Oh, there I am. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So Enlightened Solutions, Chichi and I founded when we sat down together and started talking about some of our frustrations in our careers. We were sitting down over tacos and some good margaritas, and we started talking a little bit about our difficulties. Harassment, discrimination, we had both experienced it to different degrees in different ways. And at the time, we really felt like we struggled to have somewhere to turn to get advice on how to navigate these systems, particularly at our intersections. From there, we founded Enlightened Solutions, really focusing to start out with on helping people navigate systems that have been designed to exclude them, right? From there, we branched out into research. We saw a real opportunity to do more in the DEI research space. And then from there, we did systems change. So we work with systems directly to help them implement our research, implement what we found while working with individuals and being advocates. Did I hit it about right, Chichi?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And how did the two of you meet and begin working together?
You know, it's really funny. When people see us together, first and foremost, they're like, how long have you all known each other? You seem like you've grown up together. And the funniest thing about it is Bethany and I actually met at work. And I have a very firm rule that I do not make friends at work. I go in and I go out. I am not a friendly person in that regard. I have my own friends. I have my own life. And Bethany was the same. So I was like, oh, who is this person? And so we met at work, and as Bethany was doing a lot of research in the position that we were in, and I was doing more of the community outreach, we learned we worked really, really well together. And this was just in 2017. And fast forward to this day, by late 2018, she had really convinced me to start Enlightened Solutions. And I was like, girl, I am not an entrepreneur. Get away from me. Please leave me alone. But she is not only my business partner, but she's my best friend. And we are really doing this work together, not just because we see that there's like an opportunity in Cleveland. It's because we really believe it's our purpose in Northeast Ohio.
Tara, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Yes, absolutely. So, as Rachel mentioned, I'm an attorney at Baker Hostetler. I do white-collar criminal defense and commercial litigation. And what really kind of brings me here today, so the CMBA has started REAL, right? It is their Race, Equity, and the Law initiative. And I have the honor of co-chairing a working group within that initiative with Dave Valent. He is senior counsel in the law department at Cleveland Clinic. And we co-chair the Promoting and Growing White Allyship. And so today I hope to kind of hopefully share what Dave and I have been learning through our work. And also I am a member of the subject population that's the focus of Project Noir. And then I just have to put a plug. So anything that Chichi has her name on is going to be, you know, what you want to look out for.
She's only saying this because we went to school together.
But she's always been that way. She's always top of her game, always, you know, great work product.
And ever since I have known you, nothing but good things. So as soon as I saw you behind Enlightened Solutions, I knew it was legit and that's something we need to look out for. So I'm so excited to hear you in Bethany today.
Great, that's a great testimonial. Chichi, can you tell us what is Project Noir that Tara just mentioned?
Sure. So to put it the most succinct way, in 2020, City Lab Bloomberg published an article which stated that Cleveland was the worst city in America for Black women. And I want to pause on that. To be able to receive that article in the various group chats that I have, multiple friends were sending it to me, we were talking about it online, and the resounding response was, yeah, it is. It's really, really bad here. But more than that, Bethany and I at this point had just received full funding, and we were starting out looking for a project to do. And this article kept swirling around. And we decided to really peel back into the research from that article. And what we noticed, the first thing that we noticed was that Black women were actually not interviewed at all in the article. And I want to pause there. How can you write an article? How can you create research about the worst and best cities in America and not actually interview the subject population? So Bethany and I were like, so is anybody going to do this or no? When we saw that nobody else was going to do it, we decided to. And we decided to create first a pilot survey, which interviewed about 77 Black women in Northeast Ohio. We refined that through partnerships with Third Space Action Lab, the LGBTQ Center, Policy Bridge, a lot of the big heavy hitters in the industry out here to refine our research, and then published in later 2020 our survey. Now, this is at the height of COVID. Typically, our research methodology necessitates, groups, small groups, speaking to each other. And because we couldn't, we decided to publish this on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where within the first hour of publishing our survey using social media, we received over 100 responses from Black women in Cleveland, Ohio. By the time that we had finished, we received over 450 responses of Black women in Cleveland, and in fact had to shut the survey down early because we started receiving responses nationwide.
That's incredible. And why is it that you decided to look into the experiences of Black women in particular?
What we believe at Enlightened Solutions is that people are the experts in their own experience. And what we found with the data that we're citing was a lot of high-level quantitative data. They were looking at things like graduation rates and pay discrepancies at kind of a meta-analysis level. And like Chichi said, we had had no conversations with the actual Black women on the ground who could tell us what it's like, right? And our question was, what is it like to be living in a city that actively works to exclude you? Right? What are the textures and contours of that? How does that function? What we found was that women are really subjected to a lot of disrespect. Black women in general are consistently subjected to disrespect, microaggressions. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? And those can come in many different forms. The reason we wanted to talk with Black women is because we believe them. We believe their stories. We believe their perspective. And what we also did with Project Noir was we designed it in a way so that every woman's story would reinforce each other's, right? So when the data came in, all these women, they're not sitting together. They're not taking this survey together. They're taking this all across the city from all different types of industries, all different age groups. And what we really found was that there were major themes, right? We ran it through artificial intelligence to make sure that we were reducing bias. And we found that the major themes help us understand how marginalization functions in Cleveland, inside of systems. And the only way to surface that is to listen to Black women, to listen to their experiences. And something that I want to highlight here too is the concept of targeted universalism. Chichi and I believe in solving for the hardest problems first and then moving out from there. And what I will say is that when Black women are doing better in Cleveland, I'm going to be doing better. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm white. So I want you to take this as these issues are as important to me or as important to you as it is to the women that we're looking to support.
And what did you find? What were the themes that emerged from your Project Noir research?
I think the one word that resonated throughout the entire survey was the word grace. Black women in Northeast Ohio are not afforded grace at all. We looked at the three major metrics that we looked at were healthcare, education, and workplaces. And if you're just going to take healthcare, for instance, that means Black women that are traversing the halls of our big three healthcare institutions are not believed when they go in and they speak about their own healthcare concerns. Every single woman in here has been to a doctor, has been to a medical professional, and has tried to explain their own symptoms and have been looked at kind of like, is she being like histrionic? Is this like kind of crazy? Now imagine the compounded effects for Black women. They are not given the grace to understand that they know what's going on in their own bodies. They know what's going on within their own communities, within their own spaces, but they're not given the kind of grace that is afforded to other individuals, especially not afforded to men.
And what about education and workplace? What findings did you have there?
Yeah, I'll read off a couple here, and you can check out all the statistics at projectnoircle.com. But for instance, in workplaces, we found that 65% of respondents have been excluded from important meetings relevant to their jobs. When I've talked to attorneys, a lot of times what I hear around harassment and discrimination is there's some excuse making. And what people will say is, well, this person's just a bad manager, right? They're just not the greatest manager, and it's not that they're targeting this person. But what we found in our research is that a lot of times that kind of bad management is weaponized. People say, well, I struggle to manage individuals. Well, the reality is that you're only poorly managing one or two people on your team, right? You're making sure to sit down with all the men on your team and ask about their goals. You're making sure that they're included in meetings relevant to their jobs. And what we're finding is that disproportionately, Black women are not given that basic management in order to be successful. Another one is 77% were subjected to inappropriate comments about their features, including hair, face, etc. There's a real problem with natural hair in Cleveland. A lot of our policies talk about professionalism. Professionalism is a standard that was devised at a time where most of our industries were only accessible to a certain demographic, right? So what I want you to understand is that all of these components, they build over time, and they lead to these problems that we have with pay. They lead to these problems that we have with formal benefits. This basic lack of disrespect is a real problem. And we're often asked, what can we do to stem the tide of turnover? What we found is that there's a lot of research now supporting that microaggressions and identity conflict are 10 times more likely to cause turnover than pay. Right? So this is something we really need to focus in on. What is it like? What does it mean to work somewhere and have the basic respect and the basic tools that you need in order to be successful?
And you mentioned the word microaggressions. How would you define a microaggression, Tara?
I think somebody mentioned it here. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? And I will let the experts here go more into detail on what microaggressions are, but the impact of microaggressions is the person experiencing them. It has an impact on their psyche. It exacerbates imposter syndrome, which is, when I saw that in Project Noir, I'm like, whew, I'm not the imposter syndrome, that's a real thing. And basically it all snowballs, right, into further exclusion of marginalized groups, where, those experiencing those microaggressions are going to retreat, and it just exacerbates the exclusion. And what that ultimately ends up happening is you have retention issues. And so that's where the death by 1,000 cuts comes in, because it nicks. And the death is you end up leaving your workplace if you're experiencing that.
During our discussions, we touched on something that also came through in the first presentation this morning or this afternoon about what does it mean to be a woman in the workplace when that wasn't really acceptable, or to be a respected woman in the workplace. And I think probably every woman in this room at some point has felt mistreated or discriminated against or excluded because they are a woman. you can just feel it when that happens. You don't necessarily have evidence. You couldn't necessarily bring a case, but you know in your stomach, in your gut, that someone has made a decision about you or your professional development because of your gender. And that thinking about that really helped frame microaggressions for me too, because it's not that you could necessarily put together a PowerPoint presentation of all the microaggressions that a person has suffered, but you know, right? You know when you felt it.
It's as simple as this, right? You stated that individuals don't have the evidence, right? And I know that I'm in a room full of attorneys, so obviously evidence is very important. But it's the fact of the matter is that the evidence is not believed. We know what it means when a man says, "Oh, sweetie, can you take notes?" No, I'm not going to take notes. I don't need to take notes for you. I'm good. We know what it means when someone's like, "Oh, you know, Cheryl, her skirt's a little short." I mean, it's not affecting her job. It's not affecting you. Close your eyes. Like, it's the idea of understanding that the evidence that I'm putting forth, these microaggressions that I am feeling, whether I'm a Black woman, a Latina, an Asian woman, a disabled woman, it doesn't really particularly matter. It's that the evidence that I'm putting forth, my lived experience, you, the wider population, is not believing. And that is inherently a problem when you start looking out at a bird's eye view and saying adults are not believing the experiences of other adults.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. What can those of us in the audience today and on the panel do to be better allies when it comes to microaggressions?
Well, we're talking to attorneys, so I'm going to start there, right? If you're either side, if you're a plaintiff attorney, if you're an employment attorney, getting literate in microaggressions is really important. We make referrals from our advocacy program to attorneys in the field, right? Oftentimes when we make referrals, people in the community come back to me and say, "I don't understand what happened. They turned me down. They said that wasn't a problem." I recently sent someone out to get support from an employment attorney who was a Black man. He had been called the racial slur at work, and the attorney told him that there's no case, right? And there's nothing to support. So for a lot of people, I think, getting literate in microaggressions and understanding the impact that they have and that they are something that needs to be believed and addressed, you hold a lot of power as attorneys in turning the tide in how we think about these things. For plaintiffs' attorneys, you can get literate in what microaggressions are, and you can advance your arguments, provide context, and help people synthesize that into more litigation. What we know right now is that people of color in general, overall, we think about, the estimate is about 96% of this goes completely unreported. What we found in Project Noir was that for Black women who did report, they were more likely to be punished than the person they reported, right? Our HR systems locally are not holding up our end of the deal. We are not listening, and we are not setting the bar high enough. What I hear from a lot of people is they basically told me that I need to endure it, that this is how the world is, and there's nothing that is going to be changed. And we need people to start advancing these arguments. From the employment side, it's time to understand that the future is here. It's not coming, it's here. 33% of Generation Z are LGBTQ members. 48% are racially and ethnically diverse. The future of America is diverse. The next billion-dollar ideas are going to come from diverse minds. In 2020, 4.4 million new businesses were started. It's the most on record. And one of the fastest growing groups is Black women. And when we talked to Black women, they said that when they started businesses, they did so because they were exited from systems, right? So I want you to understand there's a groundswell, there's a change occurring. And if you're at an organization, you can help raise the bar. You can say, I see this as a microaggression. I see this as a problem. I see this as something that should be disciplined. You can take that side and you can start driving those arguments.
Let's talk about allyship a little bit more. I think that's a good segue. I've heard the term performative allyship. Can you talk a little bit about that, Tara? What is performative allyship and why is it so dangerous?
Absolutely. So performative allyship is saying that you're against a certain injustice without actually doing the hard work of changing your own behavior or changing the structures that are upholding that injustice, right? And so that actually ends up being detrimental to the people that you purport to be supporting, the issues that you want to support. And it's detrimental because when the impression that something is done is being given without actual change occurring, what that does is it keeps us at the status quo. And so if performative allyship is circulating everywhere, it's giving a false impression of change that isn't actually occurring, and so we're not moving the needle at all. So an example of that could be a company that commemorates Equal Pay Day, right? But a company that doesn't actually audit its own compensation systems to identify pay gaps. Okay, so that's performative, and then you interview and you're like, oh wow, this company's all about Equal Pay Day, I bet I'm gonna be good there. No, that company's not doing the work to actually make change, and that's why it's so dangerous, is because it keeps us stagnant.
If I could jump in, actually really funny. On Twitter this morning, as I was scrolling through all of the Happy International Women's Day posts, there is a Twitter account that is an automated bot in England where it scans all of the companies in England that will tweet about equal pay or tweet about International Women's Day, and then will retweet that post stating the wage gap that is occurring at their company.
Wow. Can you give us a link for that?
Oh, I absolutely will. I sent it to Bethany this morning, and we were like, who do we know in Cleveland that can do that? Look out for that. But seriously, more than just it's detrimental internally, we live in a 21st century society. If we can create an automated bot that can do that in England, what do you think is stopping us from doing it here in Cleveland? If your organization is stating that you are supportive of diverse minds, but you only have one Black person on your team and they're the receptionist, that's an issue. And that's not only an issue for you, that's an issue publicly. That becomes a public relations issue. So those attorneys, those legal professionals that are working within the communications field, the publicity field, or even in recruitment, that becomes an issue for Gen Z attorneys that are coming in, associates. That becomes an issue for tech-savvy millennials who are fielding job offers from organizations that are probably a lot more adept and a lot more flexible as it relates to allyship.
That leads us to the legal pipeline. Back in 2007, which was pre-pandemic and feels like about a million years ago, then CMBA President Hugh McKay issued a call to action over what he referred to as the broken pipeline in the Cleveland legal community. What did Project Noir teach us about the legal pipeline?
Okay. Chichi and I often talk about this. We use an inclusion forward model. And what we mean by that is we take an if you build it, they will come approach, right? A lot of organizations approach us and ask us for two things. They want Instagram photos with us, and they want us to build pipelines. And what we've been telling them is you probably don't want us to build a pipeline, because what we're finding is that pipeline-only interventions only result in damaging your reputation with that community. What generally happens, what we've been finding through our data analysis, what we've been finding with our clients, what we've been finding in our conversations, is that you'll build a pipeline, and then in 12 to 18 months, you're exiting them. You're either having people leave because they can't endure your culture, or you're actually terminating them because you perceive them as less competent. Right? We've worked with clients who have very different turnover rates between groups, and this is why. And so we talk about you need to invest in inclusion before we have a conversation about pipelines. A lot of organizations, they want the face of it, and again, we're talking about performativeness. It's performative to want to bring people in without including them, without considering them, without ensuring that they will be respected, have basic respect and decency at work. That's where we're at. So what we're really asking people to do is start with inclusion. This is a Black majority city. There is no shortage of talent, diverse talent in this city. We often hear from organizations, people will say to us, well, I just can't find Black talent. Don't say it. It's not true. There's Black talent all through this city. The reality is that you're probably going through one of two things. You're exiting individuals, and so you can't retain individuals of color, or you've been doing that for so long that they don't bother applying because they know your reputation already. They know they're not going to be successful.
So what does an organization, whether it's a law firm or a business, do to start changing that sort of cycle?
So I'll go again. Well, after Project Noir, we found that it was obvious that we needed to put together policies. We need to put together best practices. So stay tuned on the specific recommendations that we're making and thinking about in response to this. But up until then, start thinking about how ready you really are for these conversations. Is your executive team ready for feedback on their own behavior? Because we need your executive team to be really on board in order to have any type of success in DEI, right? Is your executive team ready to have conversations about tying their pay to DEI outcomes, right? Is your organization, do you have an ERG group? If you do, have you hired someone to manage it? In 2021, calls to our advocacy hotline more than doubled because a lot of women, particularly women of color, were being asked to take on additional responsibilities around DEI. After the murder of George Floyd, there were a lot of organizations that wanted to jump in on that. What ended up happening, and the reason they were calling us, is because as they were having those conversations, they were being microaggressed. We had multiple women who called us because they were forced to participate in ERG groups and were terminated as a result of those conversations. We have one woman who brought Project Noir in, ended up in a screaming match, and she was terminated by the end of the day. So I want you all to understand that we have a lot of work to do. And if you are ready to do those substantive changes, there is an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to get a leg up on where we're headed. There's an opportunity to retain diverse talent. There's an opportunity to tap into diverse minds. There's an opportunity to grow. There's an opportunity to outpace your competitors. But by and large, people are choosing to stay the same, stay stagnant. And I'm concerned because I think we're going to be passed over again as a region.
Chichi, can you talk, what do you think some of the barriers to allyship are? And I want to particularly focus on white women, but the majority of our audience are white women, and we tend to come from a place of privilege when we're looking intersectionally.
Sure. So famously, something about me, I will want to lob it, though, to Tara, because this is actually the work that she does. I famously don't do allyship conversations. In our duo, I just don't do it. And not because I don't necessarily believe in it or don't see the importance of it. I think that conversations like this are necessary from somebody that has a lot more experience, especially lived experience. And like Bethany said, she is a white woman. I am not. And I think that my role is a lot more suited to, again, policy, asset building, and more than that, just amplifying the voices of Black women. But I know that Tara actually does this work on the ground every single day, and I think that she would be the expert on this.
Yeah, so in my work, some of the core tenets that we follow with respect to allyship comes from the Harvard Business Law Review, How to Be a Better Ally, and I'll touch on 2 points. How to be a better ally, 1, educate yourself, and the second is own your privilege. And so with respect to educating yourself, Bethany, you actually hit on this. Somehow we end up actually putting the burden on the BIPOC to educate about our own issues, struggles, and to educate others about how to be an ally. And so what that's doing, placing the burden on the BIPOC is essentially just exacerbating the disparities, right? It's exacerbating the issue. Now, you have to, in order to be a better ally, you have to take it upon yourself and take ownership of educating yourself so that you're not misplacing that burden. Second, own your privilege. Now, without the support an effort from the majority or an unoppressed group, the minorities and oppressed groups are going to have a really hard time ever experiencing equity, right? And so from an allyship perspective, it's a hard conversation that you have to have with yourself to recognize that, to no fault of your own, there are certain privileges that you have. And Bethany, I think you asked us specific to white women. So as a white woman, there are certain opportunities or rooms you can walk in, and you're kind of just given certain opportunities off the bat that other marginalized groups have to work harder to gain. And so owning your privilege is simply just a recognition of that. And the Harvard Business Review, they have a great quote in there. It's privilege can be deployed to make positive change. And so you use your privilege to make active, positive change for others. And so those are kind of two key points that I see recurring anytime you're kind of focused on how non-marginalized groups can become better allies.
And if I jump in there, so sorry.
Please.
Just to add on a little bit, Chichi and I, I'm white, Chichi's black. In a lot of our conversations, I will say there's a difference in how I'm treated versus how Chichi's treated. It's palpable. Chichi gets a lot more aggression aimed at her than I do. I get more opportunities. People come to me to ask questions. They cut Chichi out of the loop. So I want you to understand that the privilege is very real. And even when people are talking to us about DEI, they're still engaging in this, right? Secondarily, something I want you to reflect on is, and I think this is probably the biggest barrier to allyship that I've seen, is your own trauma. Everybody in this room has been subjected to trauma in some way, shape, or form throughout our lives. A lot of women, a lot of white women that I talk to, when we explore, I'm a therapist, by the way, so I'm a social worker and a lawyer, so if you're wondering why I'm headed this direction, but what I find is that a lot of times when we're talking about resistance or we're talking about troubles with allyship, what comes up is our own experiences, the times where we were let down, the times where no one showed up for us. And for some women, it's very hard for them to support others when they feel that they have not gotten what they've needed as well. So what I want you to reflect on is how trauma, how your own roadblocks, how your own struggles have made you potentially a little bit reticent to address some of these things, or potentially have pushed your standards down, and you're telling others now that they need to endure things that frankly you shouldn't be enduring either. So pay attention to that, and pay attention to the fact that none of us are perfect. Chichi and I, one of our core values is imperfection. Humans aren't perfect. We're never going to be perfect. And if you keep clinging on to that, you're not going to be able to take that first step towards learning and opening yourself up to being an ally.
Thank you. And I want to point out that there are so many resources available online, recommended book lists, podcasts, TikTok. I actually find TikTok to be a fantastic source of anti-racist training and guidance and information. It may sound silly, but there are some creators on there that produce some phenomenal content. And some of the concepts that have really helped me in my journey are being quiet. Sometimes we just need, as white women or as people of privilege in a given room, we need to be quiet. And we need to let other people speak because we are so busy defending our privilege or possibly reliving our trauma or using whatever coping mechanisms that we had in order to get to where we are in our life today that we can't even hear what these people are telling us. And the other thing is to be wary of asking people of color, women of color, Black women, to do free labor for you. right? I mean, this is a fantastic opportunity where we have women that have agreed to give their time to teach us today. That doesn't mean that you should walk up to every person of color you meet on the street and ask them, what's an ally? How do I, how do I overcome barriers?
Don't do that at all. Don't do that.
Because it's not their job, right? If you are curious, send me an email, a text, hit me up somewhere. I have a reading list. I have so much information that I'd be thrilled to share with you. And I'm sure that you could share some information with me too. But we don't want to put the burden on people who are experiencing oppression to teach us how to be better.
And Rachel, I want to jump in on one thing you said. So it's not necessarily about being quiet. The key there is listening. And so that's where that comes from. You see, be quiet, but the intent behind that is make sure you're listening.
That's absolutely true. You do need to listen, and it does help us grow. Do we have any questions from the audience? I know we've been talking a long time, and I think this is just such a fascinating topic.
So I'm a law student right now, and something that I've experienced is that through the strong women at the school, professors, faculty, there's a lot of intimidation. So I noticed that powerful women tend to be intimidating, and I'm wondering if there's a way to hold that power without having to lessen yourself to be less intimidating, because to me, I don't even see the intimidation. I just see that that's the narrative people bring out when someone's powerful, and I was wondering if you had any advice on that.
I have thoughts.
I mean, do you?
Yeah, I think
you get that a lot, though.
I get it all the time.
She gets that she's intimidating a lot.
Intimidating, aggressive, too much. I've been called it all. I am 5'10". I was a boxer. I am a lawyer. I am a therapist. People tend to find me intimidating. What I will say is, what I've found is that there's only so much I can control. Do I get rejected a lot? Yeah, I do. There are people who struggle with that. And it's been a struggle for me. It's been a struggle to feel feminine sometimes, right? Because people decide that to be powerful, you have to be masculine. I get a lot of advice telling me to be more masculine. You need to be more decisive. You need to be more this, more that. I think, embracing your femininity in that way can be a radical act. And at the same time, what I would say is focus on what you can control. You can't control people's perceptions of you, but you can control your behavior. At the same time, I don't want you policing your behavior so much that you lose yourself. We often get a lot of advice pulling us many different ways. I've had advice this way and that way. And the reality is that you're not going to be able to smile enough or smile too little to get a contract or to have someone respect you. There's only so much you can control. And so the path I have taken in my life has been to find the people who like that about me, who like who I am and who I can be, and stick with them, right? I work with Chichi every day, and she helps build me up. That has been my saving grace over the past 3-4 years that we've known each other. So I would say lean into it. You're not going to be able to control people's perceptions. And frankly, the more I've tried to fit into boxes, the less successful I've been. So I would say be authentic, be yourself, and try to strive for people that their eyes light up whenever you're that way.
That's great advice. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
You guys talked about how people can be better allies, and obviously we don't want to put the burden on people of color, but what are some things that you found that Black women can do to protect themselves when they go through these situations in the workplace, in healthcare, or in education?
To repeat that question, the question is, what can Black women do to protect themselves in situations where they're being marginalized?
Not to put a plug, but I'm gonna plug. You can visit Project Noir CLE.com/Black women. We have an entire resource for Black women if you are having difficulty navigating systems. So we broke it down again through the 3 major systems: healthcare, education, and workplaces. And it is essentially a free resource so that Black women are able to have the knowledge to be able to, first and foremost, deconstruct their own experiences. If you're going to take education, especially law school, right? Project Noir participants, we had one that was a law student who was attempting to get additional help from a professor. And the professor threw up his hands and says, I just don't think you have it. I don't think you have the acumen to be here. Okay, so what am I supposed to do for the next 2 years that I'm going to be matriculating through your class? You're going to be looking at me thinking that I don't have it, and I know that I do. How do you protect yourself in those situations? What community can you find? How can you report this kind of behavior? Because that's poor behavior. That's not professional behavior. That's not becoming of an attorney or a zealous advocate for others or an educator. So making sure that you are the most educated that you can be. That's number one. Number two, when you are educated, when you are an individual that has the resources, lift as you climb, right? Literally reach back to the women that do not have the time to be doing this, right? The women that are working second and third shift, those individuals in your life, make sure that you are passing that information along. Women are the keepers of culture and history. If we are not passing around this education to each other, we as a society, not just women, we as a society will be lost. We need to consistently understand that we are interconnected. And the first thing that we can do is make sure that we are democratizing resources and that we are passing along this information to everybody, because we need to be protecting ourselves.
And from being in a law firm setting, from that perspective, what I have found wildly important, not only for myself, but for others, is you need to kind of find your tribe. You need a mentor. You need someone you can trust in your organization that can help you navigate those issues and that can be a sponsor for you and that can mentor you. And that person might not always look like you, but you'll come to find that person and to trust that person, and it can help you in your career. And then outside of your internal organization, find your tribe that you can confide in outside of work as well. And I think when Project Noir first came out, it was almost just a sigh of relief for me, because you're experiencing these things, but you're not, maybe is it in my head? I'm not sure. You almost gaslight yourself. And so to see it there in writing, 450 other women having similar experiences, it's like, oh, this is real. And we kind of have those conversations outside of work, you know, as Black women gathering together, we kind of can have those conversations, but to just have it reinforced in and of itself was huge, I think. And so having those key people around you is certainly a way that I think that you can protect yourself. And from an allyship perspective, I think especially in our legal community, that is huge. If you can be an ally and jump in to help guide, mentor, or be a soundboard for diverse attorneys, I think is so important. And so I have two tremendous mentors at Baker Hostetler. And, you know, but for them, who knows where my career would be, and one's here today, Carol Rendon, and I want to touch on her just for a second with respect to performative allyship. So Carol Rendon's a sponsor for me, and she's someone I trust. She's someone going to bat for me in our organization, right? Now, imagine if Carol were simply putting on a front or making people think that she's my mentor, or making people think that she's a great ally. But she's not actually in those rooms speaking up for me, but she's not actually giving me work, but she's not, you know what I mean? So then everyone in my firm would be like, oh, well, Tara's good. She's got Carol. But what if she weren't actually doing those things? And that's how you have diverse attorneys fall through the cracks, which is just another important just aspect of why performative allyship is so very dangerous. And so if you have that opportunity to mentor or be that actual ally, I think that's huge. And Carol always says, pay it forward. And I think you just hit on that. And so her being a successful attorney, paying it forward to me. And now when I'm, you know, a successful attorney, I will pay that forward. And we have to do that all together as women to keep lifting all of us up.
That's a fantastic ending. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here today, and thank you so much to our panelists. We appreciate your time and your energy.
Thank you.
amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to do a quick wrap. Okay. Yep. Fantastic.
Hang in there. We're in the last 15 minutes. We've got a great wrap-up.
I'm going to invite Rosa and Cammie if you're still here. Come on up, Cammie. Rachel, this is a test. No worries, she'll be good. All right, so our game plan here, we're in the final 15 minutes. We wanted to do just a couple of things. First, there were a few people that came in midway through the program, so I've invited our moderators, Cammie, Rose, and Rachel. We're going to just take your hot picks. I think Renuka had to leave, right? Renuka, you're no longer here. I saw you marching out with purpose. We thought we'd just do sort of some quick hit takeaways that our moderators have from the panels that they moderated. And then audience, if you've got any key takeaways, we'd love for you to share any of your thoughts, any of your insights.
9 to 5. Yes, all right. So one point that was touched on a little bit by Anne Marie was how her mother and grandmother taught her and instilled in her advocacy and leadership. And one point that we didn't get to at our panel that we wanted to talk about is instilling those attributes, traits in our own children, whether it be male or female. And so that would be a point I would like to take because, we saw what Ann Hill, the incredible woman, her and her organization did for all of us and how we need to, as the other last panel said, pay it forward.
From the audience.
Whoa!
Speaking of being powerful and intimidating, give me a microphone. Other takeaways from the first panel that anyone would like to share? Fantastic conversation. All right. Rose, let's go to you. Actually, Rose, if you just, no, you guys, if you just start talking,
Okay. I think from our panel, it was the passion, and they all found their own way that they're doing.
And
that's what I think we can all reflect on.
The work that we're doing in our lives. It's so important. We spend so much time doing it. And so what I encourage as we're reflecting on our careers is being reflective and trying to analyze whether this is in line with our values and how we are contributing to community. I would like to recruit everybody because whether we're talking about racism, whether we're talking about social justice or the environment, policy is such a huge area of work, and there aren't enough people who are in the public sector doing good policy. So that is a takeaway that I'd like to put forward. Awesome. Thank you, Rose. Other takeaways from the audience?
Hey, Renuka, I know I put you on the spot. Any big picture takeaways for you?
Definitely. I would say 2 points on this. One is immigrants or foreign nationals, when they come in, they are always looked down upon. Some of the points that the last discussion happened, not only happens to Black women, but also other color women. And that is something that we need to be cognizant of while doing it. So there is a huge positive impact that they are bringing in. The smaller section, definitely there is a bad aspect to it, like the undocumented immigrants and some of the things that we don't want, but that's the overall package. If you're looking at an overall package, there will always be some elements that you don't like on your pack, but the rest of it is more. And we did have a good discussion on how impactful and positively they are building our community in terms of bringing in value to all sectors across the industries, and that's something that I would take away.
I would love to add 2 other quickies. One is immigration process needs to happen faster, right? I think we'd all agree to that. And then the other one that I hadn't thought about in a while is that use of the word alien in our legislation and the need to really petition to dump that. Anybody else? Other takeaways from our immigration discussion?
Policy.
Policy. More good policy for sure. Great. Okay, Rachel, bring us home on allyship.
Well, I just think the theme of paying it forward, just on a macro level as well. I mean, International Women's Day, it's a time for us to celebrate our accomplishments, how far we've come, the work that we're doing. And yes, there could be more progress, but let's not forget to turn back and to bring up the other members of our society that have been marginalized over the years and really let them have their opportunity to shine and be amplified as well.
Outstanding. I would also love to contribute two other that I had quick sort of takeaways. One is I loved the line, solve the hardest problems first. It's really, really powerful. Simple, but powerful. And then the other big takeaway, of course, we've done a lot. Tara mentioned our racial equity in the law, the real efforts here at the CMBA. To be a good ally, the first thing you have to do is educate yourself. And the second is to own your privilege. Well, if you're looking for your own self-journey, how do you educate yourself? You could go right now to our website at clevelandmetrobar.org. Under our Real tab, we have a 21-day racial equity habit building curriculum that you can jump in right now. Okay, clearly with the mics going in and out, it's time for us to stop talking. I get that. All right, so on our website, and if you're looking for more information, any of us can help get you there. Any other takeaways in the audience? Yeah, please. Chris. Let's give it a round of applause. Chris Green. For International Women's Day, Chris. We're glad to see you again this year.
So, to Tara's point, I think that about performative allyship, I think that comes up a lot. There's an issue that we assume that because somebody works somewhere or knows somebody that they'll get help with advancement in their career or even substantive knowledge. And that often doesn't equate to reality with even what they're taught, anyone, man, woman, whatever. And we just need to remember that just because somebody works with somebody doesn't mean that the knowledge is going to flow. We have to continue to teach that.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? Yes.
So my name is Noir. I'm like a walking diversity person. Usually nobody needs to ever give me a.
So I'm of half Asian Indian. My mother is Jewish. I'm married to a black man. I'm Hindu. I went to Catholic schools. I have Judaism in my background as well. It's all over the place. I think the number one thing that came out of all of the panels, and really with a concentration between the racism and the immigration, even those quote-unquote bad apples in the immigrant pool need to be treated with dignity. And the way that we learn is by listening. I would encourage people to actually actively seek out relationships with people who are different than themselves and actually socialize like a normal person. A lot of times people are like, well, we can read. Definitely reading is good. Watching movies and educating ourselves like that is really important. But maybe just having a conversation with the black person that's at the bus stop or on the bus with you, or just chatting with people. I think that just having real conversations that are respectful will lead everyone to understand that everyone basically has the same goals and maybe comes from a different background, and the differences don't mean that they're worse. Different pattern of speech, different use of vocabulary, all of these things don't mean that the person is more intelligent or less intelligent. And just talk to people like they're your friends, or you want to make a new friend, and I think that helped today.
You just made the case for our bar association. That's exactly why we exist, Mira, is to bring people together, right? Different perspectives, different experiences, different points of view, so that we can talk constructively to one another. I was talking to a couple people earlier today. We've lost the ability in so many sectors of our world to sit down and actually have a decent conversation with each other. So you're right. Let the talking continue. Any other quick takeaway? Oh, I see a hand.
So my name is Jennifer Gardner, but one of the things that came out of the first panel was someone saying we don't have to hide the fact that we have children anymore.
I returned to a law firm setting in August of 20 after 6 years away home to raise my son. And I had completely talked myself out of even thinking that was possible. But I went into my interview and I talked about my son and I talked about the realities of my life and I talked about the fact that some days I have to leave work and go pick him up and then I work from home after I pick him up from school, and I found an environment that's supportive of that. But the point is we don't have to hide those things quite as much anymore, and I don't know if it's sort of the confluence of the pandemic and just the time that we're living in, but those opportunities do exist and we can actually sometimes try to do both. It's usually lopsided one day or the other, but I found that really encouraging, that it wasn't just my experience, but that that's becoming a more universal experience.
Hey, as we finish things out, we got a couple of these I will statements. So I'm going to invite anybody who's brave enough to share theirs to please do. I'll give you an example. Here's one that someone submitted. I will respect other women and not judge them or the decisions they make. I did not write this one, but I could have. I could have written the last one too. I will do my best to make sure my daughter knows her worth every single day. Anybody brave enough to share?
I said, I will determine the impediments to working. This is in response to labor force shortages ideas. To determine the impediments for working for those populations and suggest solutions to employers to implement ways to meet workers' needs. Like, for example, the one thing I was thinking of was a lot of people don't have transportation. And, I love RTA, but it's not particularly convenient for a lot of people. So I don't know why more employers don't offer transportation to their employees. I think that they would have no problems with getting workers if they could give them transportation. So that sort of thing.
Anybody else? Oh, good.
I'm Allison Younger. Hi. I wrote, I will lift up my fellow female law students and support building a longer table, not a taller fence.
Thank you. If this mic weren't already going out, I would drop this mic. Well done. Great. Who else? Anybody else? All right, so what I would love to do is to collect these. You don't have to share. We are going to do a summary. Obviously, we won't do it with attribution, but we're going to share these with the full group that was here. So if you are willing to contribute, we would love to collect it. All right, so, and you can see anybody on the staff. The girl in the pink jacket. We got Carrie Burns is around here. Pega's over here. Melanie Farrell's in the back. We've got our dream team. Stephanie Anderson's there. Lots of people to collect. But we would really very much like your I will statements. All right. The last thing before we all go enjoy a lovely, lovely, lovely reception on the balcony is I would love to take a selfie of all of us. Do you know there's not only a theme for this year, but there is also a sign, a symbol for International Women's Day 2022. Anybody other than Team CMBA know what it is? Rose, do you know? Anyone not paid by the Team CMBA? Not tell you. It's this. Here's what I'd love you to do. Just stand up where you are. Stand up where you are. And if you guys want to go get in the picture, why don't you can leave your microphone, head down to the front row or whatever row you choose. And I'm going to do my best with, now that thanks to TikTok, I know how to take a wide lens picture. Yep, it's not just for my 16-year-old daughters. This old dog has learned a few tricks. All right, and there is a website, internationalwomensday.com, where we can submit all this. So we may go global, people. So make it good. Okay, I'm gonna quit talking here. All right, there it is. All right, put them up, ladies. And Chris. All right, I'm doing a couple. Oh, Carrie Burns says, wait, one more thing.
I just want to say CLE information will be emailed to you. Thank you.